Chapter 303. Aesop sighed softly. I am the only son of my father. I have been away from my hometown for almost 60 years. I am afraid there are no relatives there. I just want to see my hometown and find the feeling of returning to my roots. My father is a businessman, and he often takes me with him when he goes out. I spent a lot of time in Yaluan City when I was a child. This is the most representative city-state of the Hilton United Kingdom. You might as well stay in Yaluan City for a few more days. There are many situations here that are different from the countries on the continent. The carriage continued to move forward under the guidance of Aesop. After arriving at the Hilton United Kingdom, Madanzo did not continue to sit in the carriage with Aesop. He got a horse outside the city and rode beside the carriage. Madanzo was handsome and dignified. He looked like a bodyguard that Aesop had hired with a lot of money. On the contrary, Amon, who was driving the carriage, looked inconspicuous. While walking through the streets and alleys of Yaluan City, Madanzo looked around and nodded to the young girls and wives who were staring at him. When they reached a place where there was no one around, he asked Aesop, "In my opinion, Yaluan City is only equivalent to a small city-state." Yaluan City was only equivalent to a small city-state, but it appeared to be very rich. The aristocrats were very leisurely, while the civilians were very busy. According to the discussion of their citizen representatives in the city's conference hall, they attach great importance to trade with the outside world. Not only do they ask the states that have joined the alliance to open trade, but the rich merchants also use various ways to earn the interests of the states. The citizen representatives here are also not willing to strictly investigate the improper profits of their rich merchants outside. Aesop explained, "This place is backed by the mountains and the sea. There is no large piece of flat land that can be farmed. There are a lot of materials that need to be imported. Moreover, the rulers here are mostly shrewd merchants, like the people of Tuleng City. They are more willing to engage in higher value work in exchange for more wealth with limited labor. Yaluan is a trade transit station between the kingdom of Bidon and the other countries of the continent. It is a center. Half of the city's own income comes from the profits of maritime trade. Many people here are also very knowledgeable." Madanzo, hearing you say that, I remember back then, I carried things that I didn't have in the mountains and ran to the Link tribe to trade damask steel embryos. What do the people here trade with the outside world? Aesop, the most important product here is olive oil. The nearby mountains are not suitable for farming grains, but they are very suitable for growing olive trees. The olive oil produced by Yaluan City is very expensive and is sold all over the continent. The staff in the hands of their city's patron, Yaluan Na, is an olive branch. They also exported wine, pottery, and marble. They also mined for silver and minted silver coins and all kinds of handicrafts. As for the other goods on the continent, including Igut's papyrus, spices, Hittite, and Babylon's wood, cloth, and all kinds of grains, they import them not only for their own use but also for resale to the other cities for profit. In this city, some people are very leisurely, chatting every day in the shrine square, while others are very busy, often sailing on the sea, trading in the trading houses. Amon, who had been squinting his eyes all this time, spoke again, "I saw the seaside outside the city. There were people with stones in their mouths, talking incessantly to the empty sea. They were not praying but calling and encouraging something. They did not have a clear belief, preaching irrelevant or contradictory theories." Amon used detection magic to see the scene in the distance outside the city. Aesop smiled and explained, "Those are orators and sophists. They are training their tongues." Madanzo asked, "What are they doing this for?" Aesop replied, "In a city like this, to be able to preach a variety of views and be accepted by the people is one of the most important skills. Didn't you hear the discussions in the city council? Sometimes whether a proposal is passed or not depends not entirely on the proposal itself, but on who and how to preach it. Merchants often hire professional orators to put forward proposals that benefit them, so some people think that oratory and sophistry is one of the greatest skills in the world." Amon asked with interest, "This is indeed a very interesting place. Apart from the orators, who do you think is the most unique person in the city?" Aesop replied, "There are sages and wise men. The so-called sages are not necessarily wise, but they like to ask all kinds of questions and try to answer them. They also travel to different places to learn all kinds of knowledge. The so-called wise men are not necessarily full of wisdom, but they are good at questioning and questioning, trying to refute any known knowledge. These people often gather in the shrine square, preaching to passers-by or asking questions to the people. That is the most lively place in Yaren. Aman smiled. Successful sages and wise men should also be outstanding orators. To be able to clearly present the thoughts of the soul, allowing the listener to understand the deep thoughts, is also a kind of achievement. But if one ignores the things they preach and uses sophistry to achieve their goals, then they will become another kind of person. As for doubting all knowledge, it can also make people think, what is innate, what is created by people? But merely questioning without giving an answer is useless. Even if the answer isn't perfect, it's just like how mortals are unable to ascertain whether there are gods in this world, but they can sense the existence of divinity in human nature. Aesop replied, "You are my god." Aman smiled. "In Yaren City, I was only your driver." While they were talking, the carriage stopped in front of an inn. In front of the inn was a tavern and a public bathroom, a place for people to drink and chat. In the courtyard behind, there were rooms for people to stay in. Aesop said, "Decades have passed, although the appearance of this place has changed a lot, but it is still an inn." Medanzo asked, "Aesop, why do you want to stay here? There are many places to stay on the way here." Aesop sighed. "Please be considerate of an old man like me. The last time I went out to sea with my father, I stayed here in Yaren City. Although they are not the same inn, I can still find the breath of memories." Medanzo jumped off the horse and helped Aesop alight from the carriage. He shouted, "Guards! Prepare the best room for my master, we want to stay." Aman heard Aesop say, "breath of memories," and looked at his back as he walked into the inn. He quietly launched an incredible magic in his soul. This magic was similar to the legendary Great Prophecy, which was said to only be performed by the gods. And the supreme mages on earth could barely see the mystery of it. It was one of the highest realms of message magic, the tracing magic. He saw a scene in his soul. Aesop became only 16 years old, overlapping with the back of Aesop in front of him. He walked into another inn with his father, which was in the same place now. Aesop was very rich and could afford to live in the best room. He also had majestic guards and honest and capable coachmen with him. He looked like an old nouveau riche who had returned from an adventure on the continent. The innkeeper's attitude was very respectful. He always greeted them with a smile, but in addition to envy, there was also a little jealousy and even disdain in his heart. The people around saw Aesop more or less had the same mentality. Aman felt it clearly, and Aesop himself probably also understood it very well. But the old man was calm. The three of them settled down in Yaluan City. It was an ordinary place, and there was nothing special about it. Aman had specifically told Medanzo that this was the realm of the Olympian gods. Although he had not made any explicit agreement with Zeus, it was tantamount to entering someone else's oracle without permission. In order to abide by the agreement between the various divine branches and not cause any unexpected conflicts, he wouldn't show any miracles or use any divine power here. Moreover, Medanzo also had to be careful not to act as a divine envoy. Did Zeus and the Olympian gods know that Aman had come to Jaren? Aman couldn't be sure because he didn't feel like he was being watched or locked on. He was also a Lord God, so he knew very well that if the masses behaved in a normal manner, they would not attract the special attention of the gods in the divine territory. He had come here only to hear, to see, to feel it as an ordinary coachman. The next day, Aman came to the famous temple square of Yalun, which was located in the high city of Yalun. The reason why it was called the high city was because there were 3 hills here, and its geographical position was relatively high, overlooking the port by the sea. On the top of the hill in the middle stood the famous Virgin Temple, which was dedicated to the patron goddess of Yaluan City, Yelena. She was the goddess of wisdom, goddess of war, and goddess of virgins in the Olympian pantheon. Aman didn't want to enter the temple and attract the attention of the gods, so he just stood in the square and looked into the distance. He couldn't help but nod in admiration. The outline of the magnificent marble building couldn't be seen in a straight line. The four walls were slightly curved, and all the pillars were slightly curved inwards. Although the huge stone building was very heavy, it looked light and agile. The temple building was also the crystallization of people's wisdom. As Aman was looking into the distance in the square, someone suddenly came over and asked, "Are you a foreigner?" Aman nodded and replied, "Yes, I'm a foreign driver." This person didn't come to question Aman's identity, but seemed to be looking for someone to talk to. He then asked, "You're looking at the temple, may I ask if you believe in the gods?" This question made it hard for Aman to answer, so he could only smile and said, "I'm sensing my soul. When I do, I can witness the existence of the gods." At this time, there was already a group of people in twos and threes watching the show. The person continued to ask, "Oh, how did you witness the existence of the gods? Did you see the statues in the temple, or did you hear the voices of the gods? Have you seen the gods themselves? Even if you heard their voices, how do you know that it wasn't an illusion? Even if you saw someone who claimed to be the gods, how do you prove that they are the gods?" Aman frowned slightly. The atmosphere here was rather open. There were actually people openly questioning the existence of the gods in the plaza of the shrine, and casually asking a question to a stranger on the side of the road. There were even people waiting to watch the show. Aman asked, "Then do you believe that the gods in the temple exist?" The person replied, "This question is too complicated, and the lifespan of humans is too short. I can't be sure if there are gods in this world." Aman asked again, "Then why are you asking me this question? Are you hoping to get an answer from me?" Seeing that more people had gathered around, the person became spirited. He spread his arms wide and said loudly, "Passers-by, I'm just asking a question. What yardstick do we use to measure everything in this world? Is it the will of the gods? Whether something is right or wrong, good or bad, it all depends on the desires and needs of people. Isn't that what you think in your heart?" Some of the onlookers nodded in agreement, but the person changed the topic and said, "Then do you think that your desires and needs should be correct? Does the truth exist? People of Yalun City, the truth of the world is not decided by a referendum or by counting the number of people. If you believe in the former point of view, can you vote in the citizens' assembly to decide whether the gods exist or not?" The person raised two arguments in succession, and some of the spectators were already dumbfounded by the questions. Aman replied with a smile, "The temple stands here, and the people here have already expressed their choice in their own way. Since you want to discuss the topic of existence today, you might as well ask your question. In fact, what you want to ask is if the gods exist, what kind of existence should they be? To be honest, this is the first time I've encountered such a debate. May I ask for your name?" The person replied with his chest puffed out, "My name is Parmenides." "Foreigner, could it be that you are also a traveling sage? Please answer another question for me. Can you tell me what doesn't exist? Can you describe things that are beyond the realm of thought and perception? When you think of something and use words to say it, there must be a corresponding thing. Can you really say something that doesn't exist?" Aman smiled again, "I think you've already answered your question. Why do people think? This is the meaning of the awakening of spiritual intelligence. They can imagine, yearn, abstract intuitive knowledge into the vow of the soul, and find their own existence in the complex world. One of the answers to this question is the gods you mentioned. Although you have been questioning the gods, you are also hypothesizing them." Parmenides couldn't help but blink. He often pulled people to debate in the square, but he didn't expect this inconspicuous foreign driver to have such a response. Aman looked at him, and his eyes passed through Parmenides' figure and looked at the whole square. He quietly cast a tracing magic again, and as if witnessing the flow of time in his soul, he saw the breath of memory in the square. Countless people were talking about all kinds of topics here. Finally, the god's eyes stopped at a certain scene. It was a few decades ago, when an old man stopped a passerby in the same place and asked a question. The old man was bloated and wore a stained robe, but his muscles and blood vessels were abnormally strong. He turned out to be a supreme warrior. His hair was messy, and he had a bulbous nose. He didn't look very handsome, and he wore thin clothes on a cold day, but he didn't feel cold at all. He asked the passerby, "Do people have souls? If they do, can they be immortal? If they can be immortal, then what kind of existence is an immortal soul? Why can people have an immortal soul, and why do people refuse to recognize it? What is the difference between one olive and another olive? Why is one cat not another cat? If your answer is that the color and pattern of the fur are different, then what is the cause of this difference? Honorable Lord, under your robe, what is the difference between your flesh and blood and the passing driver? If you both go to a faraway place that no one knows, or your parents exchange babies at birth, how can you prove that you are nobler than him? Please answer another question. What is noble in this world? Aman activated his magic and saw the scene in his memory. With a smile on his face, he asked a series of questions that the old man had asked, wanting to see how Parmenides, who was standing in the same position in the square, would react. Parmenides's expression changed and he suddenly asked, "Who are you? Are you also from Plato Academy?" A frightened voice in the crowd shouted, "Oh my God, Socrates, he's been possessed by the soul of Socrates." For some reason, the crowd suddenly dispersed, and in front of Aman was a surprised Parmenides. Aman smiled and asked again, "Let's go back to your question. If I said I was a god, would you believe me?" Parmenides let out a long sigh as if he had calmed down and asked, "Does it matter whether I believe you or not?" Aman pointed to the temple in the distance. "It depends on what kind of god people want. Whether you believe me or not, I'm standing in front of you. Perhaps it won't change anything for me, and it won't change anything for you. Your soul is the yardstick by which you measure the world, that's true, but it is also the yardstick by which the world measures you. You don't have to care about the existence outside of this world, but you have to care about how you exist. This is my answer." At this time, there was still one person left in the crowd, and he couldn't help but interrupt. "Isn't it boring for a coachman to discuss this kind of thing in the square of the temple? If you have the time, you might as well make a few trips to the shops and earn some money." Aman laughed and turned to the person. "Thank you for the reminder. May I ask your name?" The person replied, "I'm Dewey. I just want to remind you that all the knowledge people have is only for the sake of dealing with their own situations. From your words, you should be a smart person. Instead of thinking about these boring questions, it's better to improve your own situation." When Parmenides heard someone else take over, he turned to Dewey and said, "From your point of view, the existence of gods is meaningless. People only live in their own perception and situation. For example, if this coachman claims to be a god, if he isn't your god, then he doesn't exist. If he can give you the miracle you want, then he is a god, right?" Chapter 304. He took a few steps forward and stared at Dewey. "Since you have such an opinion, it proves that you can think. Then what is the point of your thinking? A stone doesn't need to eat or earn money. What is the difference between you and it? Why do you find it fun to stand here and listen to other people's discussions?" When Aman saw this, he quickly stepped forward and pulled Parmenides back. "So I was just talking about Socrates. I've heard of this name. You asked me if I was from Plato Academy. Can I ask you about another sage from Plato Academy? His name is Aristotle." Parmenides replied, "Oh, he's no longer in Yalun. I heard he's a court teacher in the kingdom of Macedonia. It's very far from here." As he spoke, he wanted to chase after Dewey, who was about to leave, and Aman took the opportunity to disappear into the crowd in the plaza. The next day, Aesop said to Aman, "My God, the Yalans also like to watch all kinds of plays. Mortals perform stories of the gods on the stage. This is different from the acrobatics of other countries in the continent. If this kind of performance was performed in Igut or Hittite, it might be considered blasphemy. But the Yalans love to watch it." Aman was very interested. "Oh, I also heard yesterday that there is a special theater here. People put on costumes and perform stories of the gods and mortals. How did it first come about?" Aesop replied, "The earliest ones came from the discussions of the people in the temple plaza. Clever actors and actresses turned the topics about the gods they heard in the temple plaza into a play for passers-by to see. As a result, it was very popular. Later, there were sages who wrote plays for the actors and actresses to perform in the theater. This is one of the most popular forms of entertainment in Yaluan. Metatro interrupted, I went out for a walk yesterday. I heard that there are 3 playwrights whose plays are the most famous. They write tragedies that earn men's breaths and women's tears. I want to see them too. Amon nodded and said, That's good. Let's go watch the play together. I have never seen such a performance, and no other city has ever seen such a theater. Aesop was the master, sitting in the carriage. Medanzo was the bodyguard, riding a horse and following the carriage in an awe-inspiring manner. Amon was still the inconspicuous coachman, driving the carriage to the busiest theater in Yaluan City. Aesop asked for the best seat. Today's show was Prometheus. At the beginning of the show, a group of artists on the stage should be playing the role of God's messengers, singing poems praising the gods. This scene was no different from the scene of the various countries praising the gods in the heaven's core continent, but ordinary people replaced the identity of the gods' messengers on the stage. Amon just watched with a smile on his face. After a while, he gradually became entranced, because the god appeared. This was the story of the birth of the Olympus divine clan. According to Amon's understanding of the Olympus divine clan, Zeus had fused with the divine kingdoms of the original gods and created the Olympus divine kingdom. This process was also accompanied by a war of the gods. The difference from the war of the gods in Anunnaki was that Zeus sought to prove a higher achievement than the god of creation. The legends of the human world were expressed in a way that people could understand, but in Amon's view, Prometheus was a god on the losing side in the war of the gods, and also the opponent of Zeus. In the myths and legends of the human world, it was vaguely hinted that he had achievements equivalent to or higher than the god of creation, which surprised Amon. Because in the story, Prometheus mixed soil with river water and molded it into the shape of a human according to the image of the gods. The goddess of wisdom, Yelena, gave the soil a body and a soul that could think, and so there was the first man. This coincided with the background, that is, the first god of creation of the Olympian gods was not Zeus. Generally, in the myths of various places, the so-called creator was the first god of creation, and Prometheus was just a representative name. The next story on the stage was the interpretation of the human world, and it was more interesting. As a god, Prometheus was biased towards humans, and did not hesitate to deceive the gods for the sake of humans. This angered Zeus, and Zeus decided not to give the fire to the human world. But Prometheus violated the decision of the Lord of the gods, and used a stick of incense to steal the fire from the sky, and brought it to the human world. Seeing this, Amon couldn't help but smile. He remembered the cave-dweller tribe of Link, where there was an undying fire in a large cave to worship the gods. He also remembered the holy fire of light that the Potsdam Empire worshipped. These were all related to the most primitive gods and the origin of religion. Fire symbolized light, warmth, protection, and hope, and was also the beginning of human wisdom from ignorance. In the myths and legends of various places, it was the gods who created the human world, and gave them light and warmth, and the situation here was no exception. But the playwright of Yaluan City adapted the structure of the myth, and the fire became the fuse of the conflict between humans and gods, which was the so-called name and the true language in Igut's myth. The name referred to the achievement of the gods, and the true language referred to the method of achieving this achievement. For mortals, it was the secret to becoming a god, and Amon's personal experience confirmed this process. The name referred to the achievement of the gods, and the language referred to the method of achieving this achievement. For mortals, it was the secret to becoming a god, and Amon's personal experience confirmed this process. It seemed to imply that Prometheus wanted to tell the world the secret to becoming a god, and Zeus did not want the guidance of the Lord of Origin power to be made public. It seemed to imply that Prometheus wanted to tell the world the secret to becoming a god, and that Zeus did not want the guidance of the Lord of Origin power to be made public. Whether such a thing really happened, Amon was not sure. He did not know much about the internal secrets of the Olympian gods, and the stage was just a play of the human world. He could not help but ask Aesop, if someone could write such a play, It means that the legend has been passed down for a long time. According to the legend that you know, what kind of god was Prometheus? Aesop frowned and replied, "When I was a child, I heard a long time ago that Prometheus was a sinner among the gods. This man used tricks to deceive the gods, so he was punished by Zeus and imprisoned forever in chains. And in the play we see, it is clear that the myth has been reinterpreted, and the god has been given another form, and the legend has been given another kind of relief." Ammon was slightly moved and said, "Sinner? The story of this play should have the earliest origin. Such a god should belong to the defeated side of the ancient Olympian gods. The human that Prometheus created is also an allusion to the believers of the defeated god, like my ancestors and the people of Duk." Medanzo touched his nose and said, "Now that you mention it, it really does look like it. If it was not the Olympian myth but the Anunnaki myth, I would have thought it was an allusion to the story of Duk. If Prometheus was not the god of the defeated side, but one of the sinners, then it would almost be an allusion to your story." Ammon smiled and said, "In the world under the sun, there are always shadows of déjà vu. This play made you think of me, but it does not have to be me, it is just a story made up by a sage. I am just curious, why did the person who wrote this play want to incorporate a new legend on the continent and change the myth?" Ammon was asking a question and Aesop replied, "Although the myth has the shadow of the gods, people only pass it on in the way they understand it and in the process add their own wishes. Many of the stories I have told are the same. The person who wrote this play has never seen Zeus, but he has seen all kinds of people in the world. Those who try to resist but are unable to resist the authority become the father of the gods in the myth, and their wishes become the actions of Prometheus." Medanzo also replied, "People have awe and longing in their hearts, which makes them imagine the gods, and their anger and dissatisfaction with the world also makes them question the gods. People desire to have the same power and freedom as the gods, and sometimes, a neighbor that they cannot afford to offend can also become Zeus in the play." Ammon did not comment and continued to watch the play. The following play made him think of the people of Duk and the thousands of years of suffering they had endured. On the stage, the humans were punished by Zeus. The Olympian gods created a charming and lovely girl named Pandora, who came to the world with a magic box to tempt Epimetheus' brother Epimetheus. The tempted Epimetheus opened the box, and all kinds of plagues and disasters flew out of the box. At the bottom of the box was hope, but Pandora closed it and left it in the box. Seeing this, Ammon asked again, "What's with this box?" That box was just a story made up by a dramatist, but Ammon's question clearly had another meaning. Medanzo replied, "People revere the gods and fear the unknown, so they pray to the gods in their hearts for hope. People are dissatisfied with their situation, so they hate the gods who brought it all. Hope and disasters become the symbols of the gods, containing both prayer and fear." Aesop replied, "This is a protest that can be seen everywhere in the world, such as the hatred of tyrants. It also contains the ultimate goal of the protest, which is to stay in the unopened magic box." Ammon did not speak again, and the next person to be punished on the stage was Prometheus himself. Zeus ordered the oracles to chain Prometheus to the precipice of the Caucasus Mountains, where 13 generations of people lived. He suffered from hunger and cold, and an eagle pecked at his internal organs every day. His wounds healed immediately, and he endured endless torment. There was a fruit tree on the cliff, and the branches of the delicious fruit hung in front of Prometheus' eyes. When he tried to open his mouth to eat, a gust of wind would blow the branches away. This time Ammon did not speak, but Aesop muttered to himself, "Hope is right in front of you, visible, but never attainable?" Gradually, the play came to an end, and the moment of liberation came. A demigod, the son of the gods, the mighty demigod Heracles, passed by the Caucasus Mountains. This strong man sympathized with Prometheus' suffering and shot down the eagle that was pecking at him with an arrow, and broke the chains to free Prometheus. In the end, Prometheus and Zeus ended their confrontation and finally made peace, but Zeus still asked Prometheus to wear an iron ring, which was chained to a rock on the cliff, symbolizing that he was still chained to the Caucasus Mountains. Seeing this, Medanzo muttered to himself, The person who wrote this play did not understand the existence of demigods, so he understood demigods as the descendants of gods and humans. Aesop asked, "Is there really a strong man like Heracles in the human world?" Medanzo replied, "Of course there is. I've seen one, for example, Enkidu." Ammon did not say anything more. After the performance was over, he said to Aesop, "Well, it's really worth watching. Come back tomorrow." The next day, Ammon came to the theater again. He did not sit in the best seats with Aesop and Medanzo, but as an ordinary coachman, he mingled with a group of people in coarse linen clothes in the most crowded auditorium to watch the play. Yesterday's play surprised Ammon, but today's play shocked the god. It was called King Oedipus, and it was a thrilling story with ups and downs. On yesterday's stage, the gods appeared directly, but in today's play, the gods were only looming shadows, and only showed their existence through oracles. The story took place in the kingdom of the human world. At the beginning of the play, the stage was also a familiar scene that had happened in many countries on the continent. A plague broke out in a city called Thebai. King Oedipus ordered the priests to pray in the temple of Apollo, praying for the help and salvation of the gods, and to guide the people through the disaster. Apollo was the Olympian god of light and youth, and also the patron god of the city. On the wall of the temple of Apollo, there was a famous inscription, "Know thyself." Apollo gave an oracle to the city of Thebai: "Find out the sinner hiding in the city, punish the murderer of the king, and the plague will be eliminated." Then the second scene changed to the queen's memory of the king. Oedipus was not the first husband of the queen. The late king of the city had been killed by a strong man while he was away, and the son of the late king had been abandoned 3 days after his birth. The kingdom was left without an heir. Why did the king abandon his son? This was also because Apollo had once sent down an oracle, predicting that the late king would be killed by his own son. Why would the gods give such an oracle? The scene went back to the past. It turned out that when the king was young, he had robbed the son of another king, so he was cursed by the gods. Where did the current King Oedipus come from? Then the scene changed again, and the memory of Oedipus took over. Oedipus was the son of another king. One day, when he was praying to Apollo in the temple, he heard the voice of the gods, telling him that he would have the terrible fate of killing his father and marrying his mother. In order to resist this fate and prevent the oracle from coming true, Oedipus ran away from home, vowing never to return. On the way, he had an unexpected conflict with a group of people. He drew his sword and killed an arrogant nobleman, then arrived at the city of Thebai. At that time, the city of Thebai was enveloped by a great disaster. A sphinx guarded the road, asking passers-by a riddle. If they couldn't answer it, they would be eaten. Not too long ago, the king of the city-state was killed by a powerful person. In order to save the city-state, everyone decided that whoever could solve the riddle and save the city-state would be able to marry the late king's widow and inherit the throne. Seeing this, Ammon had already guessed what the playwright wanted to write. Oedipus was the son of the former king, and the man he killed was the former king of the city of Thebai. The oracle may be a symbol of fate, and the words inscribed on the wall of Apollo's temple were the root of the tragedy. People don't have eyes that can see everything like the gods. Oedipus didn't know where he came from, and everything he did was to fight against the fate foretold by the oracle. At this time, Ammon noticed that there was a head in the front row of the audience that stood out, because the person was bald, which was very rare in the Yaluan gang. There were fine hair stubble on the green scalp, and it didn't seem like he was born bald. Ammon recognized this man. It was Vincent Boss, who had walked with Amitba in the Saya desert, and later met him in the city of Talon. This man was a transcendent who had been guided by another kind of power. Suddenly seeing this person again in Yaluan city, and in a position where he could reach out his hand, Ammon was taken aback. Vincent Bo also felt it. His shoulders tightened, and he turned back to recognize Ammon. Then he nodded and smiled and turned back to continue watching the show. But a voice came to his soul. "Ammonius, how did you enter the realm of Olympus? It seems that you have not obtained permission from the gods. Doing so may cause disputes." Ammon asked in his soul, "Aren't you here too?" Vincent Bo replied, "I'm just here to watch the show. I won't show or use any of your so-called miracles. Aman said, "I'm just here to watch the show. I won't show or use any of your so-called miracles." Vincent Beau said, "Oh? Then the way you looked at me just now was not that of a mortal. It had the power to penetrate the six senses. If I were a god of the Olympian pantheon, I might be alarmed or angered by you." Aman smiled and said, "I know you are not a god of the Olympian pantheon. You are just watching the show in the crowd like me. In order to confirm your identity, I only had that kind of vision. You can feel my soul-penetrating gaze. Is this a kind of miracle?" Vincent Beau replied, "The guidance I received is different from the path you are familiar with. I am just self-sufficient, which is different from your so-called miracles." As he spoke, he imprinted a piece of information in Aman's soul. This practitioner called a certain method magic, but it was different from the so-called miracles of the pantheons. It was just an extension of perception. When this ability was possessed and used, it would not have any extra impact on the world. Chapter 305. 286. The Eye of God in Quantum Mechanics. The ability to see far away was not because the eyes emitted some kind of vision, but because the perception was more refined and the ability to receive and distinguish information from farther away. In fact, the information received by people was the same, but some people's souls were clear and deep, and they could see more than others. When this magic was used, there was no extra stimulation. Aman could also do this, but the magic practiced by the mages on the continent did not make a special distinction in this regard, because to enhance the perception, one could always use many methods to detect what others could not, as long as these methods were useful to oneself. For example, by using elemental disturbances, one could perceive things that had not yet been discovered. Just like a fish in muddy water that could not be seen, one could reach in and touch it, and still find the existence of the fish. As early as when Aman was a teenager, he had just learned water magic from Crazy Ol, and had not yet heard of detection magic. He had used this method to discover Maki, who had secretly followed him into the charcoal forest to plot against him. The higher his achievements, the more tricks he would master. For example, when using detection magic to lock onto a target, the best way was to disturb the aura of the target's environment, so that the target was always in a state of being perceived. As for whether this could be discovered by the other party, it depended on whether the method of the caster was ingenious and how successful the other party was. In the minds of many mages, oracles, and even gods on the continent, as long as one's realm was higher than that of the person being detected, and the method was more ingenious, it did not matter whether one disturbed the other party's environment or not. However, Vincent Bevis pointed out that the difference between the seemingly similar methods was in touching or not touching the observable object. No matter how ingenious the method was, and whether the other party could detect it or not, as long as there was active interference, it would affect the result of observation. Aman suddenly realized why Vincent Bevis wanted to talk to him about the difference between magic and miracles. He was secretly referring to the play that was being performed on the stage. Because Apollo had sent down an oracle saying that the former king of the city of Thebe would be killed by his own son, so the former king abandoned his youngest son in order to escape the fate that the oracle implied. The oracle was predicting a result, but the oracle itself was the cause of King Thebe's abandonment of his son. Fortunately, the baby did not die and was adopted by the king and his wife in another city. He was Oedipus. Oedipus also heard the oracle of Apollo, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. In the same way, the oracle not only predicted the outcome, but also became the reason for everything to happen. It was because of this oracle that Oedipus left home and came to the city of Thebes. Vincent Bosch actually explained the meaning of the so-called oracle in the play. The gods are watching Oedipus and prophesying his fate, but the oracles themselves are both cause and effect, forming part of the tragedy. What caused the tragedy of Oedipus? Not only were the prophecies of the gods who paid attention to the human world pushing forward, but there were also the struggles and choices of the people interacting with it. Aman understood that Vincent Bosch was on the stage, but he brought the topic back to the means of perception and asked in the soul, sometimes the purpose of detection is not to observe, but to discover, and it does not matter whether you are discovered by the other party or not. Large-scale disturbances of the atmosphere in the environment have always been the best means of breaking all kinds of stealth magic and revealing the hidden person. You can't say that this method is useless, but how do you evaluate this kind of stimulation? Vincent Bosch replied in the soul, "It depends, are you watching the play or acting?" Aman could not help but smile. Vincent Bosch's answer was very clever, and he had pointed out the most essential difference between two seemingly unnecessary means. Vincent Bosch's words also carried a message of magic, focusing on the concept of cause and effect. When the gods came to the human world, the way they looked at the people directly led to whether the gods themselves were involved in the cause and effect of the human world. What was cause and effect? It was to be in it. There was no difference in the means themselves, the only difference was whether the gods were involved or not. If the gods chose to participate, then in this matter, they were not transcendents. Vincent Bosch's reasoning was very simple, but when analyzed carefully, it was profound. Aman nodded and smiled. I understand what you mean. If the gods are in the cause and effect of the human world, they do not have to be regarded as gods. So when some gods do certain things, they are not transcendent existences. At this time, the gods are also people. Vincent Bosch continued to watch the play, and in his heart, he was also thinking about Aman's words. But Aman's soul was touched, and he suddenly thought of another person, the fallen Faust. In Faust's tragedy, Aman actually played a similar role as Apollo on the stage. But Aman had his own purpose, and at the time, he was personally involved in the matter. In fact, when he assassinated Emperor Hinnock, he also faced the risk of dying. It was not that what he did was right or wrong, but the difference between the gods entering and leaving the world. Vincent Bosch in front of him was not better than Aman in terms of realm, but from another path of seeking confirmation, he gave Aman some kind of inspiration and collision of thinking. Aman couldn't help but sigh. In the myths of all over the continent, there are legends that the gods created human beings in their own image. Therefore, some people believe that human nature contains divinity, and a holy soul can bloom the glory of divinity. But in fact, it is people who create gods themselves, so there are statues in the temples. Some people seek the path of transcendence, so there are gods in immortality. This is the human nature of divinity. I have witnessed a wise and holy soul in the world. Although she did not transcend eternal life, she was already a god on earth. And at this moment, the people on the stage are playing the gods in their minds, but in fact, they are also thinking about the human nature contained in divinity, thinking about themselves. Vincent Bosch replied, Good, thank you for your advice. It seemed that Aman's words had also given him some insight. But Aman, as if deliberately looking for a difficult problem, asked with a smile, I also thank you for your inspiration. But the difference in means you just mentioned is only for ordinary mortals. But in fact, your so-called magic of only observation and not touch is not without disturbance. According to my personal experience, many of the senses of the great achievers are beyond that of ordinary people. For example, when you look at a supreme warrior with murderous eyes, even if you do not disturb any aura in his surroundings, his soul will have a vigilant reaction. This is the intelligence of the great achievers, not to mention the gods. Vincent Bosch, how do you justify yourself? Your so-called magic will also lead to consequences. Vincent Bosch did not have a clear answer to this question, but respectfully said, I am not a supreme warrior, and I have transcended from the Buddha's teachings in the Amitayus, but I have no such experience. I would like to hear the details, please guide me. Aman smiled and said, Not necessarily guidance, it is just mutual verification. As you said, will the magic of the great achievers cause the spiritual response? It is only a matter of whether your heart moves. Vincent Bosch replied, Not moving, not distinguishing, is the Dharma Mudra. The Amitayus said that the movement of the mind is the cause, so this is it. I have heard that the great achievers also have a unity of mind and body, like an arhat, so this is it. Good. Aman laughed. I have never heard of an arhat. I only know that after the death of the great achievers, their souls can refuse the guidance of the underworld and wish to disperse or be reborn. The two talked off stage, and the play on the stage continued. Oedipus met the Sphinx on the outskirts of the city of Thebes, and the Sphinx asked the riddle, "What is it, 4 feet in the morning, 2 feet at noon, and 3 feet at night?" Oedipus gave the answer, "Human." A newborn baby could only crawl on all fours, and when it grew up, it walked on 2 feet, and in its old age, it would use a cane. The riddle was solved, and the Sphinx jumped off the cliff in shame and indignation. Oedipus saved the city of Thebes, married the widow of the late king, and became king. Medanzo, who was watching the play, suddenly muttered, "I have an impression of the Sphinx and her riddle. It is the myth of Igut, but the playwright here made it into this story. I am just a little puzzled. Is that a Sphinx or a psychopath? If the riddle is solved, then leave. Why would she want to commit suicide? Can't she even stand this little bit of stimulation?" Aesop was amused by him and laughed. "This is just a symbol in the play. People lose their lives because they can't answer the riddle, and the Sphinx jumps off the cliff because the answer is revealed." Medanzo explained, "I know what it means, but I still think that the Sphinx is crazy. If I were to write this play, I would never write it like this." Aesop laughed. "That's why you can't be the playwright. You are Medanzo. You clearly know what the play is about, but you feel uncomfortable. It has nothing to do with the playwright. Medanzo, you have to remember, you are you, and the Sphinx is the Sphinx." Medanzo also laughed. "Yes, I understand what the playwright is saying. The oracle not only foretells the result, but also pushes the cause of the tragedy. Oedipus is fighting, and it is also pushing the tragedy to happen. But Aesop, can we discuss another possibility? In fact, if the old king wants to fight against the oracle, it is very simple. I have a way to make Apollo's prophecy fail." Aesop, "Oh, what is it?" Medanzo, "If the old king is really so decisive and doesn't want the oracle to come true, he can just slit his own throat and kill himself. Surely his son won't be able to kill him again. Let's see how Apollo can still jump around." Aesop grabbed Metatro's arm and almost choked with laughter. After a long time, he said in both anger and amusement, "This is your so-called confrontation. He thinks he's smart, but he's just admitting defeat and running away. This is meaningless. Although he was not killed by his own son as the oracle said, he still died because of the prophecy of father killing." Medanzo also scratched the back of his head and laughed. "Then let's change the method and simply ignore the oracle. What can we do?" Aesop stopped laughing, narrowed his eyes and said, "This is still an unknown result. The oracle is just a prophecy. It doesn't tell the old king how the prophecy will come true. It is the old king who made the choice. Medanzo, you have a problem, a very serious problem. You know you are just a spectator. The old king is not you, and he will not meet your expectations. You are only suitable to play for others to see, not a suitable audience and commentator. Why did Apollo give such an oracle in this play? And why did the old king abandon his youngest son? It is because the old king had robbed another king's son when he was young, so he was cursed by the gods. He abandoned his youngest son out of fear. If he really wanted to kill himself, he would have done it long ago. Do you think you can talk to him? If someone else said this to Medanzo, Medanzo might be angry, but Aesop and Medanzo were old friends for decades, so Medanzo just laughed. Ammon in the audience also heard the conversation between the two, and he could not help but smile bitterly. As a 9th-level divine emissary, Metatro's magic power was not inferior to that of the others, but Ammon knew very well that this disciple of his would probably be the last one to transcend eternal life among all the disciples in the Garden of Eden, if he could be so lucky. The play on the stage gradually reached its climax. Oedipus finally learned that the parents who raised him were not his biological parents, and that the person he killed on the way was the former king of the city of Thebai, his biological father. After all the truth was revealed, the queen committed suicide. Oedipus took 2 gold pins from the queen's body and stabbed himself blind. The actor on the stage shouted, "I did not know who I was, but Apollo knew. Those who caused all this, including the gods, they knew." At the same time that Oedipus stabbed his eyes, he also saw the answer. Just like the words on the wall of the temple of Apollo, he knew who he was. At this time, a man behind Ammon said with emotion, "Where is the will of the gods? It does not transcend everything in this world, but is contained within it. Behind the so-called oracle and the choices of people, there is an absolute spirit. The so-called gods are only a part of the changes in things, if they really exist. Another young man next to him said, "Did you know? This play was written by my teacher." The sorcerer was surprised. "You are a student of Sophocles. What is your name, please?" The young man replied, "My name is Shakespeare, and you?" The sorcerer replied, "My name is Hegel. Since this play is your teacher's work, what do you think of it?" Shakespeare said thoughtfully, "My teacher wrote a fairy tale, and the oracle of Apollo runs through it, forming both the beginning and the end. But it is a human story, and the Apollo in the story does not matter whether he is a god or not. Hegel, you can also make that kind of prophecy if the king in the story takes it as an oracle. The root of all these things is human nature itself, and the riddle that Oedipus answers when he faces the banshee is the answer given by my teacher." Hegel asked with great interest, "You study drama with Mr. Sophocles. Do you have any works that you want to write, and what kind of myths are you interested in?" Shakespeare said, "I have been studying the myth of Igut recently, and I want to write a play myself." Hegel asked, "Is it about the legend of Ammonius?" Shakespeare shook his head. "No, it is about the legend of Isis, Osiris, Seth, and Horus." Hegel asked, "How do you want to write it, The Revenge of Horus?" Shakespeare shook his head. "No, when people tell myths, they often do not treat them as stories about gods. The gods that people speak of are also the source of all kinds of human nature. It can happen in some human kingdom, haven't we seen it? The younger brother of the king murdered the king and usurped the throne. The young prince finally discovered the truth and sought revenge. Human nature determines the choices that people will make, and the story will be interpreted in different ways." Hegel laughed. "It must be a wonderful play. I hope you can write it soon. I'll be waiting to enjoy it. According to what you said, the root of all these things is human nature itself, which determines the choices that people will make. But when we look deeper into the starry sky, in fact, no matter what answer people think of, they are constantly pursuing an ultimate goal. And those answers, whether you find them or not, have long existed. The law of all things is the will of objective existence, which determines the way that everything in the world exists. The gods in people's minds are nothing more than this. The world is its own existence, and it is revealed to people to see how much you can discover." Shakespeare was stunned for a moment, and then said with great interest, "Your thinking is very creative, even surprising and bold. It reminds me of another student of my teacher, Freud. He may be looking for the same kind of thing as you, but the target of his research is the same as mine: human beings. He believes that there is an inner instinctive drive that is the root of all human behavior, and the complicated affairs of the world can be explained from it." Hegel frowned slightly. "Oh, that Freud from the distant city of Salem? It turns out that he also became a student of Sophocles. So does he explain where the inner drive of man comes from? And what laws do all the changes in the world that he interacts with obey?" Shakespeare smiled. "You can talk more clearly with him in person. He is also watching the play in the back row, and it just happened to be over. Why don't we go find a tavern and have a drink together?" Hegel nodded cheerfully. "Let's drink and talk." When the play was over, Shakespeare and Hegel called Freud, who was watching the play in the back row, and they went for a drink together. Ammon, who heard this conversation, couldn't help but smile. Just like the question and answer he asked when he faced Parmenides on the square of the Temple of Yelena the day before yesterday, when people questioned the gods, they also assumed the gods. They questioned the existence of the gods, and at the same time, they were also thinking about their own existence. Chapter 306. The next day, Ammon came to the theater again. In the same position, he saw Vincent again. The two just nodded and smiled, then continued to watch the play. It was the work of another dramatist, and as each play was of a shorter duration, two were performed in succession. The first was called Ion, and was still the story of Apollo. The dramatists of the city of Aram seemed to be particularly fond of satirizing this god. As the curtain opened and the actors entered the stage, Ammon frowned more and more. The Apollo on stage did not look like a god at all. He looked more like a shameless and licentious aristocrat on earth. Not only was his behavior despicable, but he was also treacherous and morally corrupt. When Apollo came to earth, he shamelessly seduced a lovely girl. The girl gave birth to a son named Ion. Apollo, who only cared about pleasure, abandoned the girl and returned to the kingdom of heaven to be his god. When the girl gave birth to the child, she couldn't do anything with him. So she put him in a box and sent him to the cave where she and Apollo met. The god should be able to see his son. Of course, Apollo saw it, so he asked Hermes, the messenger of the gods, to help him take the box and put it in front of the temple of Apollo. The priest took the child in. The child grew up in his father's temple and played all day under Apollo's altar. He didn't know who his parents were. Because of his unique origin, people saw him as a sacrifice to the gods on earth. He was born to protect the gods in the temple. The girl later married a stranger. She thought Apollo had long forgotten her, but this aroused the jealousy and dissatisfaction of the gods. Apollo punished her for not having a child. The poor woman didn't know why, so she went to the temple of Apollo and prayed to the gods. The climax of the play happened when the mother and son met in the temple. The woman recognized her son and told the young man the story of another woman in a faraway land. She didn't tell Ion that the unfortunate woman was herself. Ion sadly said in front of the altar, "Noble lady, your friend's fate is so similar to mine. She is looking for her son, and I am looking for my mother. But don't expect the gods on the altar to give you a satisfactory answer, because you are accusing the gods in the name of a friend, and the gods will not make a mistake." The woman in the play didn't tell Ion that she was his mother, nor did she pray to the gods. She turned around and left the temple. That was the general content of Ion's myths and legends. However, the play on the stage had interpreted the vague myth into all kinds of detailed details. The devil was in the details. It turned a legendary folktale into an exposé of the evil deeds of the gods. Apollo was not only hypocritical and lustful, but also despicable and jealous. At the end of the play, there was a long narration. If God's conduct was despicable, he would no longer be God. The divine body could not set the rules for the human world, and he had violated it. People imitate the evil deeds of the gods, and the gods call it evil. Vincent Beau suddenly laughed and said in his soul, "Ammonius, there may be people who will make fun of you in the future." Ammon also laughed. There are some things in the play that are not wrong. If God's conduct was despicable, he would no longer be God, and God cannot violate an agreement that has been made. Vincent Beau said again, "As you said yesterday, when the gods are no longer transcendental existences, the so-called gods are also people. But this play is obviously making up the evil of the gods, and using this as a basis to criticize the evil of the gods. Although it is only talking about Apollo in the play, it is also pointing the finger at Apollo in the temple. And the evil of man is the evil of man, no matter who he imitates, and no matter who the judge is, it will not change." They muttered here, and Medanzo and Aesop were also whispering over there. During the interval between the two plays, the whole theater was full of people. Medanzo muttered, "Is this dramatist sure he is writing about Apollo? And not some lord who has offended him? No matter how I look at it, it looks like the story of a folk high priest, and he has put on a god's hat and written into the play." Aesop laughed and said, "There are many such things in the human world. More people will be willing to see the protagonist as a god. If it was a cat or dog on stage, how could there be such an uproar?" Medanzo said, "The gods are really unlucky." The Aesopian was still laughing. "Well, they are gods after all." Medanzo said again, "I found that people love to watch such plays, and writing such plays also makes it easier for the playwright to get a higher rating. You see, these people in the theater are excited when they watch the play, but many of them are inexplicably satisfied." Aesop sighed. "Look at the scandalous things that Apollo has done. He is not like a god, but a man of no morals. But people are happy to see that the gods also have their own bad habits and unspeakable desires, so they get a sense of satisfaction from standing side by side with the gods. It turns out that the gods have the same dark and despicable human nature as they do. This time it was Madanzo's turn to laugh. If they think that way, they will never become gods, and there are no gods in this world. Aesop sighed again. If the gods really did this, you really don't have to treat them as gods. Ammonius is also watching the play. Let's continue. Madanzo asked curiously again. If Apollo saw this play, how would he feel? Aesop laughed again. How would I know? You can ask Apollo. If he really did this, he deserves to be scolded. If he didn't do it, it doesn't matter if he doesn't watch the play or not. It's just that the cat or dog in the human world has been changed to his name. What people do in the human world, they assume that the gods will do the same. After a short break, another play was played on the stage. When the play reached its climax, Madanzo couldn't help but look at Ammonius, wanting to see how the god would react. The play just now was about the evil deeds of the gods, but the play now was simply denying the existence of the gods. A hero rode a winged Pegasus into the sky, wanting to see if the gods really existed. He didn't find any trace of the gods, but he looked down from the sky at the evil that was rampant in the human world, and the power that was trampling on the right. The hero sang loudly, "Good people, please listen to me. It is said that there are gods in the sky, but there are none. There are none. As long as you have a trace of wisdom, you will not believe in the old legends. There are countless tyrants in the human world, and they have taken the good away. Those who worship the gods, how cowardly their hearts are. Please tell me where the gods are? When I fly up into the sky and can't see them, where is the light, warmth, and hope? I want to announce to the human world that there are no gods in the sky. There are none." At this point in the play, many of the audience showed a look of horror. Aesop turned his head and said to Madanzo, "I don't know if there are gods in the sky, but there is one sitting in the theater today." Madanzo frowned. If the playwright really sees the world like this, then there are no gods in the world he sees, and the gods are sitting in the audience watching the play he wrote. Aesop sighed. The hero who flies up to the clouds can announce that there are no gods in the sky, but when he cries out, is he also examining his heart? Where is the light, kindness, warmth, and hope? In the most crowded part of the theater, Vincent Boss seemed to be deliberately teasing and asked, "Ammonius, what do you think?" Instead of answering directly, Ammon asked, "Vincent Boss, I would like to ask you, how would you feel if the name of Apollo was changed to Immeasurable Light in the first play?" Vincent Boss replied with a smile, "You are asking the wrong person. The great enlightenment that Buddha spoke of is not a god, nor has he ever considered himself a god. Immeasurable light is just a title. The light of the self shines in all directions. It is self-sufficient, has no beginning and no end, is immortal, can come and go, and can give birth to all things. It doesn't matter how it is arranged. Since immeasurable light shines in all directions, immeasurable light cannot be seen." Ammon blinked. "What about the one I saw in the Syrian desert?" Vincent Boss replied, "The incarnation of fate, just like the one I saw in Yaluan City." Ammon, "I am not immeasurable light." Vincent Boss, "You are a coachman watching the play." Ammon smiled. "I see. Then what about the Buddha you speak of?" Vincent Boss replied, "Enlighten the heart of wisdom and seek retribution." Hearing the Dharma is like seeing Buddha. Practice all the good Dharma, observe the self, and seek perfection. Ammon nodded slightly and said, "Immeasurable light has 3 bodies?" Vincent Boss also nodded and said, "Dharmakaya, incarnation, and Sambhogakaya, 3 bodies in one." Ammon stopped talking and entered an ethereal state of meditation. He really became a spectator, silently watching the people in the theater. In his eyes, the play was not only on the stage. Everyone was watching the play on the stage, and at the same time, they had also become the performers of the play on earth, watched by the gods. Ammon sought to prove his current realm. He did not know what this realm should be called, only that the angels called him the one god. Then, above this achievement, was there a higher realm, and if there was, how should he seek to prove it? Ammon did not think about it, nor did he have the time to think about it, because he had not yet reached the state where he had all the achievements of the current realm. But today, when he heard Vincent Boss mention immeasurable light, Ammon had an insight that there was indeed a higher realm. He did not accept the guidance of immeasurable light, but he could find another way to prove it. As for the way to prove it, Aman was still figuring it out. At this moment, Aman suddenly discovered that another god was also watching the play in this theater. If Aman had not been watching the crowd in this state, he might not have noticed it. Because for the past 3 days, this person had been watching the play in this theater, but Aman did not pay special attention to him, let alone recognize him. It was only now that he suddenly realized who he was. It was a middle-aged man with thick eyebrows, big eyes, and a strong figure, sitting not far from Aesop. In the best position in the theater, he was dressed in a white robe, and there was wine and fruits on a small table in front of his seat. Aman had never seen his appearance before, but there was a mysterious feeling that awakened a familiar mark in his soul. After the death of King Leone of Kabata, Zeus came to Earth in a different identity and was now sitting in the theater of Yarn City. The actors on the stage had arranged Apollo to look like that, and Zeus would not have any light on his face. In the myths that circulated in the world, Zeus had done many things worse than Apollo in today's play. He was the #1 lecher in heaven and earth, and was simply the #1 perverted thief on earth. Compared to the deeds of Zeus, the things that Apollo did in the play Ion were nothing. The second play that followed was also written by the same playwright. The hero in the play simply rushed to the clouds to curse the gods, and then announced to the world that the gods did not exist. But looking at Zeus' appearance, he was not angry at all. From beginning to end, he was smiling while drinking and eating. He seemed to be enjoying the play, and was simply a bit heartless. Throughout the entire theater, Aesop, Medanzo, Vincent Beau, and Aman all showed a smile, but when the second play reached the climax, only Zeus was smiling, and his expression seemed to say, "Since you said there is no god, then why did you curse the gods? Then why do you have to curse the gods? If all the vices of human nature were bestowed upon the gods, would people be free?" Aman silently observed, and read the meaning of Zeus' smile. Zeus had also become a part of the play in front of him. But did Zeus see Aman? In Zeus' eyes, did Aman also appear in the play? On the second day after Aman entered Yarn City, he wandered around the temple square. Then he watched the play for 3 more days. In total, he stayed for 5 days. On the morning of the 6th day, he said to Aesop, "We have seen everything that needs to be seen. It's time for us to leave and send you back to your hometown, Medulla." Medanzo was puzzled and asked, "Why not stay for 2 more days? I haven't seen enough of the play." Aman replied, "If you want to see the play, you have plenty of time. But I found Zeus in the theater yesterday. He was sitting next to the 2 of you, and he has been there for the past 3 days. I entered the realm of Olympus without permission, so it's better not to complicate matters." Medanzo was surprised. "Really? Why didn't I find him?" Aman explained, "Zeus' achievements are no less than mine. I only found him yesterday when the play was about to end. I haven't noticed him for the past 3 days, so it's normal that you didn't notice him." Medanzo asked, "My God, did Zeus notice you?" Aman replied, "I don't know, but it's not like he doesn't know me. I'm in my original appearance." After breakfast, Aman drove Aesop, while Medanzo followed the master and servant on horseback, leaving Yarn City for the city of Medulla. The city of Medulla had also joined the Yarn League. Most of the cities of the Yarn League were located in coastal and mountainous areas, and there were many dangerous places along the way. There was no need to worry about large groups of people, but small groups of people had to be wary of strong people. After all, the region had just experienced war, and there were some soldiers who occasionally took on part-time jobs. When passing through a dangerous mountain road, there was no one around. Medanzo suddenly heard several people talking in the dense forest. One of them said that Aesop came back after making a fortune outside. He must have brought a lot of money with him. No one here knows him, and no one will care about his whereabouts. Kill him with a sword and throw his body down the cliff. All the money will be ours. Another person, who seemed to be the leader, said in a very displeased tone, "You called us here and said that there was a big deal, but you didn't understand the situation. The old man named Aesop is not a big deal, but his coachmen and guards are not easy to deal with." The first person said, "What are you afraid of?" There are only 2 of them, and they don't even have weapons, while there are 8 of us here. The leader said angrily, I'm afraid the 8 of us are not enough to deal with the 2 of them. Didn't you notice? The carriage was as stable on the mountain road as if it was on flat ground, and the people in the carriage didn't feel the bumpy at all. How can an ordinary coachman have such skills? Another person said, look at that guard again. His riding skills are so good that he can do whatever he wants. The distance and position between him and the carriage are always the same. It's as if he is taking a stroll. How can an ordinary bodyguard have such skills? The first person who spoke was surprised. Are they 2 supreme warriors? How rich is that Aesop? He can make a supreme warrior drive a carriage for him. The leader said again, how can a supreme warrior drive a carriage? You can't hire one even if you have money. It's a matter of identity. I think the coachman is a very powerful intermediate warrior, but the guard may really be a supreme warrior. We can't do this deal. Let's give up the idea as soon as possible. Someone next to him suddenly said, I heard that Aesop came from Lung. He has traveled thousands of miles and passed through many war-torn places. If the guard is not capable, he would have been robbed long ago. How can he wait until we arrive? This was a group of bandits. The informant had set his eyes on Aesop in the city. They were lying in ambush outside the city in an attempt to rob and kill him. However, they came excitedly but regrettably did not dare to make a move. They could only watch the carriage pass through the dense forest. Bandits also had a way of survival. If they jumped out rashly without understanding the situation, they would only become small thieves who died quickly. The carriage had already gone far away. Suddenly, someone in the dense forest exclaimed, Fire! How can it be on fire? Pants, oh my pants! Another person shouted, It's burning me! He hurriedly threw away the weapon in his hand and then hurriedly reached out to take off his clothes. It turned out that at this moment, the weapons in their hands suddenly turned red, as if they were being burned in a furnace, and their pants were inexplicably on fire. The bandits not only burned their hands, but also their bodies. They threw away their weapons, took off their flaming clothes, and rushed out of the dense forest naked. They were all inexplicably terrified, thinking that they had been punished by the gods. Aesop's carriage had already gone far away. Medanzo rode beside the carriage and laughed. Obviously, he was the one who had just done it. Aesop, who did not know the inside story, asked, What's so funny? Medanzo replied, The weather is so nice and cool. Amon, who was driving the carriage, of course heard the conversation of the bandits in the dense forest. He also knew what Medanzo had done, but he did not pay attention to it. He was only silently thinking about a question. Who was the Zeus he met in the theater yesterday? Chapter 307. This question was very interesting. Of course, Zeus was Zeus. Amon had already recognized him. But what he was thinking was another matter. Zeus's appearance was different from the King Leone of Kibata he saw last time. Did this god himself come to the human world to watch the show, or did he cut off another incarnation? Or did he simply change his identity and come to the human world to wander? What did such an identity mean to the gods? Zeus and Amon's achievements were similar, but his breakthrough was much earlier than Amon's. He mastered it more deeply and skillfully, and comprehended more mysteries. The so-called incarnation was not as simple as changing one's appearance or identity at will. If this was the case, even some 9th-level divine emissaries could do it. When it came to Zeus's achievements, the meaning was completely different. Vincent Augustus relayed the words of Amon, Thought is the cause of fate. Then for a god like Amon, the cause of a thought was the cause of the incarnation, and each incarnation was unique, representing the god's vows, thoughts, and experiences that had to be verified by this identity. In the myths and legends of the kingdom of Hellas, Zeus was a playboy in the human world, and it was said that he had many children. The gods were a kind of transcendent existence, and the blood relationship between the gods in the myths of the continent was actually a kind of inheritance between the guide and the guided. But when it came to Zeus, it was a bit puzzling, and it might be true. Amon thought of Goliath, who was buried. Goliath never married in the Hittite kingdom and lived a quiet life, But if Goliath left behind descendants, it was not impossible. Anu came to the human world in the form of a new soul and became Goliath, which was an attempt to surpass the achievements of the God of creation. It was difficult to say whether this attempt was a success or a failure. Zeus, like Ammon, took a different path. He opened up the kingdom of Olympus, and was able to leave the kingdom of Olympus and come to the human world freely, fusing with the divine kingdom of the God of creation. So far, the path that Ammon sought was not significantly different from that of Zeus. But the Olympian gods seemed to be very involved in the world. This Zeus came to the human world again and again, sometimes as the god himself, and sometimes as an incarnation. What kind of existence did a god like Zeus come to the human world? What kind of existence did he seek, and what kind of method did he use? These were the questions that Ammon was thinking about on the way. He himself was also walking in the human world as a driver. While pondering, Ammon drove the carriage into the city of Mytilene, which was one of the oldest cities in the Hellas kingdom. It was once the birthplace of civilization and the economic and commercial center of the Hellas peninsula. But after the Hippo War, its importance had been replaced by the city of Yalon. Aesop entered the once familiar city. 60 years had passed, and he did not recognize many places, but the city was still the outline of the city. He had Ammon drive the carriage to a mansion. He lifted the curtain and got off the carriage, sighing, "This old mansion has been repaired, but it is still the same building. The statue in front of the door is still the same as it was 60 years ago." The servant who guarded the door came over and asked, "Are you here to visit my master? Why did you stop the carriage here?" Aesop asked, "Who is your master?" The servant replied, "It is Master Retter Ackerman. This mansion belongs to him. But the master is not in the city. He went to the manor outside the city to collect rent." Aesop looked a little excited, but he tried to calm down and asked, "Master Retter Ackerman? Is his father called Ross Ackerman?" The servant replied, somewhat puzzled, "Yes, I have heard of the name of the master's father. May I ask how you know, and why are you here?" Aesop pointed to a sign hanging on the courtyard door and asked, "Is Retter Ackerman selling this mansion?" The servant suddenly understood and said, "Are you here to buy a mansion? Master Ackerman is asking for 200 gold coins. As long as you are willing to pay this price, you can register it with the city's property department and get the deed. This mansion will be yours." Aesop asked, "Why does Retter Ackerman want to sell this mansion?" The servant scratched the back of his head and said, "I am only a servant, so I am not too sure. I heard that the manor's harvest isn't too good, and Master Ackerman has a new mansion. He wants to sell the old mansion and the manor, and then buy a ship to go into business. Most of the lords who have recently made a fortune from the war think so." Aesop frowned slightly. "Of course you can make money by doing business, but you can't just abandon the ancestral manor. If the city doesn't have any products, how are you going to trade? If everyone goes into business, whose money is going to be earned?" The servant was obviously very talkative and said with a smile, "Of course it's going to be earned from the foreigners. As for the manor, mines, and workshops, let others manage them. All the lords want to earn big money, quick money, and other people's money." Aesop asked again, "If the people of this city don't pay attention to production and only want to prosper through trade, once the prosperity is gone, they will fall into a predicament. Trade itself is only about exchanging what each other needs, and merchants can profit from it. But if the foundation is ignored, the city can only rely on foreign products to support it, and it won't be able to prosper for long." The servant scratched the back of his head again and said, "I am only a gatekeeper. What you said is what the lords need to consider. Now that Mytilene has joined the Euron alliance, the alliance is very powerful and can guarantee its position in trade. But I digress, you are here to buy a mansion, right? I can bring you in to take a look. If you want to buy it, Master Ackerman will be back before dark. You can talk to him in detail." Eugene smiled. "This is my father's mansion, and my name is Aesop Ackerman. It's just that I haven't mentioned this surname for many years." The gatekeeper was shocked and turned to look at Aesop with widened eyes. "You are also from the Ackerman family? Why haven't I heard of your name before?" Aesop explained, "My father's name is Hussein Ackerman. He is Ross Ackerman's elder brother and Reed Ackerman's uncle. He used to be a merchant, and he was shipwrecked at sea 60 years ago. I was lucky enough to survive. This mansion belongs to my father, and I grew up here. I didn't expect it to still belong to the Ackerman family. If I had come a step later, I'm afraid it would have been sold to someone else. The gatekeeper was dumbfounded. Please, can you prove all this? All right, even if you are Master Aesop Ackerman, this is still your family's business, and it's not something a servant like me can interfere in. Master Reed is not here. Are you going to wait for him here? Metatro had already opened the door and said to Aesop, Master, please. Aesop walked into the old mansion and smiled at the gatekeeper. You are a good gatekeeper, don't worry. If I take back the mansion, I will still hire you as a gatekeeper. Reed Ackerman had a larger and more imposing mansion in Midgely Slope. This mansion had already been vacated, and there was only a maid cleaning and the caretaker of the house. They were preparing to sell the house. Aesop's sudden arrival caused the gatekeeper to not dare to offend him. Aesop had already entered and sat down in the living room. The maid asked the gatekeeper what was going on. The gatekeeper whispered a few words to her. The maid frowned and poured water for Aesop. Aesop smiled and gave them a dozen copper coins. The maid's brows relaxed and brought food for Aesop. The gatekeeper took the opportunity to leave the mansion and went to Ackerman's residence to report the news. Amon was like a coachman. He didn't care about anything else. He drove the carriage to the front yard and stopped in front of the stable. Rend and Ackerman arrived before the sky turned dark. The old man didn't come alone. He brought 3 strong sons and a small group of patrolling soldiers. His face was full of anger and exasperation. He was now a nobleman. Back then, his father had inherited his brother's legacy and made a contribution in the Hyban War, thus becoming the new nobleman of the city-state. Reed himself was one of the citizens' representatives in the city-state assembly. His eldest son, Blake, was a small leader in the city-state army. When Rant received the message from the gatekeeper, his first reaction was to be furious. Aesop had died a long time ago, and there had been no news of him for 60 years. Suddenly, a man appeared and claimed to be the heir of Aesop, since Ackerman. He must be a liar who was plotting to steal the property. How could Reed let a liar succeed? He immediately called his sons, Blake Ackerman, and a group of patrolling soldiers. If it was really a liar who wanted to steal the property, he would be arrested on the spot. Amon heard the noise outside the stable. He knew what happened, but he didn't care. Medanzo accompanied Aesop in the living room. Reed left the guards outside the yard and rushed into the living room with his 3 sons. He shouted at Aesop, who was sitting there talking to the maid, "You liar, stand up." Aesop stood up with a smile and asked, "May I ask who you are?" The maid replied in a low voice, "He is Master Reed Ackerman, the current owner of this house." Aesop looked at the angry Redder Ackerman, smiled, and opened his arms. "My dear cousin, is this how you welcome a cousin who has returned after 60 years away from home? Don't you want to accept my blessing and hug?" Reed was stunned because Aesop's facial features did have the characteristics of the Ackerman family. He looked very much like his late father. But Reed's eldest son, Blake Ackerman, pulled out his sword and pointed it at Aesop. "You liar, don't try to pretend to be my uncle." Aesop smiled and sat back at the table. He looked at Blake, who was holding the sword, and said calmly, "Young man, let's talk it out. Why did you pull out your sword? I told you my name, and you called me a liar. What did I lie to you about? Does the identity of Aesop belong to you?" If the old man in front of him was a liar, then this liar was very magnanimous. Aesop had been the lord of the city for more than 10 years. The city-state of Diling he had built was much larger than the city-state of Midgely. His every movement carried a dignified aura. Blake, still holding the sword, said angrily, "You claim to be my uncle, Aesop. Don't you want to cheat the Ackerman family of their property? How can you prove that you are Aesop?" Medanzo, who had been standing by the table, stepped forward and stretched out a hand towards Blake. His movement was accompanied by a strong pressure. Although Blake was holding the sword, he couldn't help but take a step back. "What do you want?" Medanzo opened his palm, holding 3 shining flame sprites in his palm. He said in a sarcastic tone, "Do you understand the situation? Does my master need to cheat you of this old house?" Reed put the old house up for sale for 200 gold coins, and the 3 flame sprites in Madanzo's hand could buy 60 such houses, which was a huge sum of money no matter where it was. Reed stepped forward and pressed his son's arm. "Put away your sword, can't you talk nicely?" Then he said to Aesop, "Old mister, who are you? Are you really my cousin Aesop?" Fu Sua sighed. "I am Aesop, Ackerman. 60 years ago I went out to sea with my father and unfortunately encountered pirates. My father was killed and I was sold as a slave. Later I gained freedom and went to the plains of Duk. After so many years, I am also old, and it was not easy for me to return to my hometown. I didn't expect to meet my relatives in the old house." Reed asked cautiously, "How can you prove that you are Aesop, and what is your purpose in coming here?" Aesop shook his head with a wry smile. "It's been 60 years, I was only 16 when I left here. I am Aesop Ackerman, but I don't know how to prove it. As for my purpose, it's very simple, I want to return to my homeland." Reed's second son, Hunter Ackerman, was the smartest and immediately said, "You came back here to continue living in the old house." Aesop nodded and said, "Yes, I want to completely renovate this old house and live here until I die. I don't have much time left in this life." Hunter Ackerman laughed. "That's easy. This house is for sale. I wanted to sell it to some other nobles in the city. If you want to live here, you can buy it for 300 gold coins. Whether you can prove your identity or not, you can still fulfill your wish." Madanzo was startled. "Well, I just heard that this house is selling for 200 gold coins. Why did the price increase so quickly?" Hunter replied with a smile, "The same thing means different things to different people, so the value is also different." Madanzo glared at him. "Profiteer." Hunter still smiled. "Thank you for the compliment." At this time, Reed cleared his throat and said, "Sir, I can't confirm your identity, but you do remind me of my cousin that I haven't seen for many years. Although I know he died at sea, I still hope that you are him. I sympathize with you and understand your thoughts. If you want to live in this house, I can sell it, just like my son suggested." At this time, Reed's youngest son, Ackerman, pulled his father's sleeve and whispered, "This old man looks so much like Grandpa. He's so rich he can't be a liar. Maybe he's my uncle. Why don't we meet first?" This sentence suddenly reminded Reed that if the old man in front of him was Aesop, then he must have made a fortune and returned to his homeland. If Aesop didn't have an heir, then his property would still belong to the Ackerman family. It wasn't a big deal to meet a rich cousin, but looking at the current situation, he still wasn't sure of Aesop's intentions. Aesop didn't care what he was thinking, he just sat there and asked Hunter, "This is my father's house. When my father and your grandfather separated, the property had already been divided. I am the rightful heir to this mansion. Why should I spend money to buy a house that is mine in the first place?" Hearing this, Reed became nervous. It seemed that this old man who made a fortune in a foreign land was very stingy. The richer he was, the more money he wanted. This time, it was clear that he was returning to his hometown to take back the inheritance of his ancestors. In addition to this house, Reed also occupied the grange that should have been inherited by Aesop. That was more than 10 times more expensive than the house, so before figuring out the situation, he couldn't easily recognize this relative. Hunter still said with a smile, "Since you're so rich, why do you care about this? In addition to the house, old Ackerman also has a grange. It's a good place to retire. If you want to find the feeling of returning to your homeland, we can part with it and sell you the grange as well. Although you can't prove your identity, you can still fulfill your wish." Aesop shook his head. "This isn't about money, young man. You don't understand the feelings of an old man like me. The reason I'm returning to my homeland is because I was born here. This is where I came to this world, and I'm looking for traces of life. If I buy this house with another identity, it'll be the same as denying my birth. If I deny who I am, then what's the point of returning to my homeland?" Blake's face turned angry again. "Oh, I get it. You insist that you're Aesop Ackerman, and not only do you want to take this house, but you also want to take our grange in the name of Aesop. This city is very law-abiding. The deed of the house and the title deed are now written in my father's name, unless you can prove that they belong to you." Aesop stood up and shook his head. "I'm looking for myself. I don't want to take away your property. You've all misunderstood me, or perhaps you can't understand. Then we'll do as you say. Disputes like this in the city should be submitted to the citizens' assembly for arbitration. Until there's a verdict, I'll stay in the inn. The house and grange will still be yours." After saying this, Aesop left with Medanzo, leaving the father and son looking at each other in dismay. Ammon had already prepared the carriage and invited Aesop to board it. The guards outside did not know what was going on, and did not receive any orders to stop them. They could only watch as they left. On the way to the inn, Medanzo asked, "Aesop, your relative is quite interesting. He doesn't dare to recognize you." Aesop smiled bitterly and said, "No matter which family it is, no one will easily recognize an heir who disappeared 60 years ago and can't produce any evidence to prove his identity." Chapter 308. Aesop took the initiative to explain for his relatives. "They don't know if I have an heir or not. Besides, I can't prove my identity, and my background is also very suspicious. The manor and the estate are real property, and they already belong to them. Only the gods know if they are smart or stupid." Ammon shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know, I'm just a driver." Medanzo said, "If you are rich enough, it's not difficult to buy the manor and the estate. If you do that, I think they will be happy to recognize you as a relative." Aesop asked, "Medanzo, we live in this world, but have you ever considered a question? Puma, you are Medanzo, but why are you Medanzo? If I do that, I will lose the meaning of searching for my homeland. In fact, I don't mind giving them a lot of money, but why? Let's start by proving my identity. I am Aesop and I will act as Aesop." Medanzo asked again, "Do you feel a little disappointed to meet such a relative?" Aesop said calmly, "Actually, I am not surprised at all, and I will not be disappointed. They were all nobodies among the masses. They might appear to be unscrupulous, selfish, suspicious, and ridiculous, but their thoughts and practices were very common in the world, and they were also very normal people. Even the dramatists in Yalun City often describe the deities as such. Since that's the case, why can't Aesop's relatives be such nobodies? Why can't my relatives be like that? Their reaction is understandable and I don't resent them at all. On the contrary, I am grateful to the gods and grateful to them. When I return to my hometown, I can still see my relatives in the Ackerman family, and the old manor where I grew up and my father's estate are still there." Ammon could not help but sigh. "Aesop, you may be the person closest to the gods in this city." Old Ackerman's son, Aesop, had returned after disappearing for 60 years. This incident caused a small uproar in the city of Migilai, and it became a topic of conversation in people's leisure time. Some people said that Aesop had made a fortune outside, but he still wanted to take back the manor and house that his ancestors should have inherited. There were also people who said that the foreigner was not Aesop, but that he had heard about old Ackerman's family and pretended to be Aesop who had just returned with a fortune in an attempt to swindle people. Aesop lived in an inn with a coachman and a guard. Anyone who saw him would say that he looked like someone from the Ackerman family. Perhaps he really was Aesop Ackerman. Some people began to discuss again. Since Aesop had made a fortune, why did he still want to take back the assets that his cousin's family had been operating for 60 years? Ritter Ackerman could be considered to have done well to keep the assets. After so many years of war, if it was someone else, the manor would have been long gone. Even if Aesop came back, who could he ask for it? The sages who liked to preach in the plaza also talked about this matter. From their point of view, if Aesop was Aesop, then the manor were his. Whether Aesop was generous or stingy, it could not change this fact. Even if Aesop was willing to give the house and the grange to his cousin, he had to prove that they were his before he could be generous and give them away. Aesop's identity would be decided by the city's citizens' assembly. This was a request from Aesop himself, and the judges were the 50 standing representatives of the city's citizens' assembly. This was different from submitting the case to the court for a judge to decide. The court could only decide if Aesop filed a property dispute complaint or if Ritter Ackerman filed a fraud complaint against Aesop. But the premise of all this was to determine Aesop's identity. Ritter Ackerman did not file a complaint to the city's court. He only claimed that he could not determine the old man's identity. On the day of the citizens' assembly, many interested people came to watch and listen. The hall of the city's citizens' assembly was full of people. The citizens' assembly appointed a representative to preside over the ruling. It was the famous sage Thales of Medulla. After Thales accepted the commission, he first invited more than 10 elders over the age of 80 from the city. They were all people who had seen Aesop Ackerman in the past. Longevity had always been seen as a blessing from the gods. After the chaotic era of war, people who had lived in the same city and enjoyed such a long life were respected elders as long as they were not criminals. There were not many such people to begin with, and it was even more difficult for them to remember things from 60 years ago. It took a lot of effort to invite 10 of them. It was indeed unrealistic to ask these elders to clearly remember a young man they knew 60 years ago but did not pay special attention to. After seeing Aesop, a few of the elders told Thales that his facial features did resemble Aesop Ackerman in their memories. But too much time had passed, and the impression of the past had long been blurred. Moreover, Aesop was now an old man, so it was impossible to confirm. Thales did not expect these elders to be able to confirm it. If they could remember Aesop, it would prove that the ruling was meaningful and not a farce. Not just anyone could come to the city and claim to be someone from decades ago, and the city's citizens' assembly would make a ruling for him. Next, Thales asked Aesop in front of the crowd, "Old man who has returned from a foreign land, you insist that you are Aesop Ackerman. May I ask if you have any documents to prove your identity?" Aesop replied, "I have documents to prove my identity in Igut and Sellenberg, but they can only prove my identity there. They are meaningless to this ruling. Such documents can only be signed by the Citizens' Assembly of Medulla, which means that I can only have them after this ruling is over. The documents from back then are long gone. Even if they are still in my hands, it is difficult to prove that I am the person in the documents." Next, the city's assembly carried out an important ceremony. Under the suggestion of most of the citizens' representatives, they requested for an oracle from the gods. If the oracle confirmed Aesop's identity, then there would be no need for a ruling. There was a statue of the city's patron god in the assembly hall. Under the leadership of 2 priests, Thales represented the people of the city and prayed to the gods for the arrival of the oracle. The situation of the Olympian gods was very interesting. Its divine realm was similar to that of the Hellenic Union. Zeus was not the main god of every city. Almost every city believed in their patron god as the main god of the city. For example, the patron saint of the city of Yalon was Yelena, the patron saint of the city of Gabados was Ares, the god of war and blacksmithing, and the patron saint of the city of Mygilai was Hermes, the messenger of the gods and the god of commerce. Ammon and Medanzo were also standing in the crowd. Medanzo's voice quietly sounded in Aesop's soul. "Don't worry, old man. If those 2 priests were bribed and deliberately lied to pretend to be the oracle, I will make sure that they will never be able to speak again." Aesop was not worried about this. He just watched silently. Ordinary priests would not lie in this kind of situation. If they really believed in the gods, how much would it take for them to betray the gods in public? Ammon was very interested in this. Would Hermes send an oracle to confirm Aesop's identity? As expected, an oracle descended. It was really an oracle from Hermes on the altar. Ammon could clearly sense it. The priests did not play any tricks. Thales, who presided over the ceremony, announced the content of the oracle truthfully. "People of Medulla, the old man in front of you has returned from a foreign land. He has not received the light of the gods there, so the gods will not prove his identity. He needs to prove himself." Ammon was slightly stunned. Hermes should be able to confirm Aesop's identity. For example, if Ammon used tracing magic, he could also confirm that the current Aesop was the Aesop Ackerman of the past. But Hermes refused to provide a conclusion. Instead, he wanted Aesop to prove himself and handed the power of judgment to the council of the city. But Hermes did not stop lying. The gods were telling the truth, and he did not deny Aesop's identity. Thales did not seem surprised by this result. After reading the oracle, he said to Aesop, "The gods have given an oracle for you to prove your identity." "Yes," Aesop replied. Aesop replied, "I can prove myself. The fact that I'm standing here is proof." But what kind of proof do I have to provide for the citizens' assembly to make a decision? Thales thought for a while and said, "This is a difficult problem. In reality, you are you, and there is no need for proof. But according to the laws of the city, there must be a basis for the ruling. There should be 3 such bases: the mark left by your previous identity, the memories awakened by your past experiences, and the traces of your homeland." Aesop nodded and said, "That should be the case. Then I will go through them one by one. First, please look at this mark carefully." He stretched out an arm and rolled up his sleeve. On the inside of his upper arm near the elbow socket, there was a faint brown mark. It looked like a scar from a long time ago. Aesop explained, "I was very naughty when I was a child. I heard that gold could not be burned and would not deteriorate in fire, so I used something to hold my father's ring and roast it over the fire. I accidentally dropped it on my arm and burned myself. The ring was engraved with the emblem of the Ackerman family. I was only 8 years old at that time, and the scar looked like half of the emblem. The scar grew bigger as I grew up, but I can still see the outline of the emblem." Thales called Retter Ackerman to him and took off his ring to examine the family emblem. The mark on Aesop's arm was indeed a blurry outline of half of the emblem. Obviously, it was not left recently. Thales then asked the other representatives of the council to take turns to examine it. Although the scar was already very vague, it was still recognizable. Amidst the crowd, Medanzo grinned happily. He thought to himself that Aesop was really cunning. He had waited until such an occasion to roll up his sleeve. After examining the scar, Aesop put down his sleeve and said, "How can I not remember my past experiences? Otherwise, how would I have found my way back here? Mr. Thales, I need you to ask Retter Ackerman a question. Although my old house has been renovated, the steps in front of the gate have not been touched for 70 years. Is that right?" Thales turned to Retter and asked. Retter nodded in affirmation. Aesop continued, "There are 5 stone steps in front of the gate of the house. They are made of stone slabs stacked on top of each other. Take the top 4 slabs apart and turn over the biggest and heaviest one. I still remember the patterns carved on the back. We can draw it in front of everyone." Thales asked, "How did you know?" Aesop replied, "The steps were built when I was 6 years old. I saw it with my own eyes." Thales ordered someone to bring a pen and paper to Aesop. Aesop drew a scepter with 2 pythons wrapped around the top. This was the usual look of Hermes' scepter. It was engraved under the stone slabs of the steps to protect the house. Many buildings in Mytilene had this custom when they were built. They would leave the symbol of the city's patron saint in an invisible position. As for where it was left, it was a secret of every family. It was said that if this secret was revealed to the devil, the person would lose the protection of the patron saint. The house was newly built by Aesop's father after he separated from Retter. The symbol of the patron saint was left under the first stone step in front of the door. This was something that even Retter Ackerman did not know, but Aesop said it in front of everyone. This kind of thing could not be joked about. If it was really verified, then according to custom, the house had to be rebuilt because the hiding place of the patron saint had been exposed. Thales hurriedly asked a priest to bring a group of strong warriors to the house to dismantle the steps and lift up the stone slabs to check. After a while, the people who checked came back, and the priest reported the results to the representatives of the citizens' assembly. The steps in front of the house had not been touched, and the information provided by Aesop was accurate. The hall suddenly became very noisy, and people were whispering. At this point, no one doubted Aesop's identity anymore. Thales waved his hand for silence and let Aesop continue to speak. Aesop was about to speak when Retter Ackerman stepped forward and bowed to Thales. "My lords and respected representatives of the citizens' assembly, There is no need to ask any more questions. This old man is my cousin, Aesop Ackerman. I have no doubt about it. Ritter Ackerman was a noble and one of the representatives of the Citizens' Assembly. When he heard the discussion, he knew the result. Regardless of whether he recognized Aesop as his cousin or not, everyone had already recognized Aesop's identity in their hearts. If he waited until after the verdict to declare his position, he and his 3 sons would be despised and ridiculed in the future. Although Ritter was a profiteer, he was reasonable and took the initiative to stand up. Thales smiled and looked at Ritter. Now the topic of discussion in the Citizens' Assembly is to confirm whether the old man in front of me is Aesop Ackerman from 60 years ago. On this occasion, whether you recognize him or not doesn't mean the final result. Mr. Aesop, Mr. Ritter, shall we continue to ask questions, or shall we put it to the vote now? Aesop smiled. Then please vote now. If the representatives of the Citizens' Assembly think it is necessary for me to continue to prove it, I will continue to prove it. The vote began. The 50 representatives who participated in the vote thought that Aesop did not need to do any more proof and confirmed that he was Aesop Ackerman. The hall was filled with cheers and applause. Ritter Ackerman called his 3 sons over and asked them to greet their uncle, Aesop. The eldest son, Blake, blushed with shame. The second son, Hunter, looked embarrassed. The third son, Will, looked very happy. Aesop opened his arms and gave his cousin a warm hug. Then he hugged his 3 nephews in turn. Then he took out 3 flame sprites and gave one to each of his 3 nephews. My dear nephews, I have returned home alone. This is the gift I prepared for you. Since you have confirmed that you are my uncle, please accept it. This is my blessing for returning from afar. Many people in the hall were shocked. They looked at the flame sprites in the hands of the 3 brothers. They never thought that Aesop would be so generous and give such valuable gifts to his 3 nephews in public. In fact, as early as the first time Aesop met his relatives, he had planned to give them the flame sprites. Otherwise, Madanzo would not have taken them out. This was a gift he had prepared long ago. Ritter Ackerman's forehead was sweating. He asked his 3 sons to kneel and thank him. He stepped forward and grabbed Aesop's arm. His lips were trembling with excitement. My cousin, you are too generous. How can you give such valuable things to your children? Please forgive me. Aesop interrupted him and laughed. I have never blamed you. I heard that you are going to buy a merchant ship to do business. I have no other use for the money. If I were your cousin, it would be natural for me to support them. In fact, I am very grateful to you. After so many years, when I return home, I can still see my old house and the estate of my youth. It is you and your family who have preserved them. This is too precious to me. This scene was very touching. Thales cleared his throat and said, The first topic for today's meeting has been voted on. I would like to congratulate the Ackerman family for reuniting with their family. Next, we will vote on the second topic. It was proposed by Hunter Ackerman of the Ackerman family. The second topic will only take effect after the first topic is decided. Aesop turned around and asked without batting an eyelid, Oh dear sir, is there a second topic for today? Thales replied helplessly, Yes, the second topic is also related to you. The Citizens' Assembly of the city-state unanimously ruled that you are Aesop Ackerman, the son of Signs Ackerman. The house and estate left behind by Mr. Signs Ackerman should belong to you. This was determined at the same time the ruling was made. Your nephew, Hunter Ackerman, has raised another issue and requested to make another decision based on this ruling. Before Thales could finish, Hunter Ackerman stood up with his face flushed. He opened his arms and said loudly, Dear representatives of the Citizens' Assembly, please forgive me for my rudeness. I withdraw my proposal. Ritter Ackerman also said, God, please forgive this foolish child. I also ask him to withdraw his proposal. Thales asked with a faint smile, Mr. Hunter Ackerman, do you really want to give up your proposal? Hunter nodded repeatedly. Yes, I withdraw it. Chapter 309. 290. The Ordinary World. What was Hunter Ackerman's proposal? Hunter seemed to be the smartest of Rant's 3 sons. He had thought of a possibility in advance. If Aesop really had some tricks up his sleeves to make the citizens' assembly decide that he was Aesop Ackerman, then the manor would be taken away, and their plan to buy a merchant ship would be ruined. To prevent this worst-case scenario, he asked the citizens' assembly to decide on another matter if Aesop's identity was confirmed: compensation for the manor for the past 60 years. Aesop's father, Signs Ackerman, was killed in an accident. The manor would be abandoned if no one took care of it. Moreover, the manor had been renovated several times before it could be preserved until now. Maintaining the manor had not been profitable in recent years, and it had become a burden in times of war. Otherwise, the family would not have thought of selling the manor to engage in more profitable trade. If Hunter had really made such a request, Aesop could have objected. For example, the manor that Rant's family had lived in, and the income from the manor should be enough to pay for the manor. Otherwise, they would not owe each other anything. This matter was complicated, but from a logical point of view, the Rant family had contributed a lot to Aesop's return after 60 years. If Aesop was rich, it would not be a problem for him to make appropriate compensation. So Hunter wanted to take the opportunity of the citizens' assembly to apply for a ruling: should Aesop compensate the Rant family? But the result was out of Hunter's expectation. Aesop did get back the manor, which originally belonged to him. But Aesop did not come to fight for the manor. He gave the three brothers such precious gifts in public, which were far more valuable than the manor. If the second proposal was thrown out in public, Hunter would become the laughingstock of the whole city of Midori. So he quickly withdrew his request. Since Hunt had given up on his request, Thales did not say what the second proposal was. Aesop, on the other hand, knew what it was. Naturally, he could guess what it was, but he did not ask. After the meeting, Aesop settled down in his hometown. He got along very well with his cousin and three nephews, and they often visited each other and had a good time. Aesop lived in the old house. Reed often invited his brother to his house, and his three nephews often visited Aesop's house. Aesop was a kind elder who treated his three nephews very well. Reed's eldest son was a military officer. He was hot-tempered and impulsive. Aesop often talked to him about marching and fighting, telling him that war strategies and judgment of the situation were far more important to a commander than being hot-blooded and impulsive. Reed's second son was a merchant, and he was the one who bought the ship. Doing business was Aesop's specialty, so he often talked to him about how to do business, and not blindly calculating for profit. As for his youngest nephew, Will, he was only 16 years old this year, the exact same age that Aesop had left his hometown. His features also bore a striking resemblance to Aesop in his youth, and he was Aesop's favorite junior. He even told his cousin to let Will come over when he was free, stay with him, and help him manage the shop. In other words, Will would be his successor in the future. Reed was naturally happy, and Will liked to come over to his uncle's side. Now that Aesop had taken back the manor and the house, why was there still a shop? This matter also had something to do with Weir. It was not without reason that Aesop liked him the most. Among the assets left behind by Aesop's father, there was a shop in Midori. Aesop's father was originally a merchant. The shop was later inherited by Reed, who sold his assets to start a business, and the first thing he sold was the shop. Aesop did not mention it again. But Weir took the initiative to tell Aesop that other than the manor, there was also a shop in the city that he should have inherited. It was not far from the manor, and it had been sold not long ago. When Weir told his uncle, he bought the shop with his own money and returned it to Aesop with his uncle's name on the deed. Aesop accepted his nephew's gift and handed the shop over to Weir to manage. Some of Hunt's goods were also sold in Midori, so of course, they were handed over to this shop. Aesop's days were very leisurely, and he would go to the city square to chat with people when he had nothing to do. He became good friends with the sage called Thales. Aesop also often went to sit in the shop, doing business at the counter like an ordinary worker. That was his old profession from decades ago, and now that he was back in it, he felt very close and happy. The old manor was naturally renovated, and it was very comfortable to live in. Amon and the craftsmen he hired personally renovated it. Needless to say, The craftsmen who worked with Aman did not notice anything unusual. They only felt that the coachman was very hardworking and capable. Master Aesop really knew how to hire people. When he was renovating the house, Aman asked Aesop if he should leave another symbol to hide since the location of the original symbol of the patron had been exposed. But Aesop said there was no need, so the original steps in front of the door were not moved, but the stone slab was restored to its original state. The stone slab with Hermes's scepter carved on the back was still in place, and there was no other symbol of the patron hidden in the newly renovated manor. Aesop believed in Aman as the one and only god. To him, the scepter carved on the stone slab was just a traditional hidden decoration, to be kept in place to preserve memories. But he did not believe in Hermes, so there was no need for him to do anything else. With Aesop's age and experience, he had already reached a state where he did not need to be moved by anything. He could do whatever he wanted and be at peace with himself. He knew who Aman was, but he still watched as Aman repaired his manor like an ordinary craftsman. It was Aman's own request, so he did not interfere. Anyway, he happened to need someone to repair the house, and Aesop did not care whether the person who repaired the house was a god or not, as long as Aman was a qualified craftsman. If someone in the know saw this scene, they might think that Aesop was being disrespectful to the god, but Aesop knew very well how to get along with this god. Aman must have come to the human world to seek proof, and since he did so, it was the process of seeking proof. Aesop did not know what he could do for the god, but this was his help to the god. After the house was repaired, Aesop did not need to take a carriage to live in the city, and Aman, the coachman, was unemployed. But he made another request to Aesop, hoping to take care of the manor. Aesop asked in private, "My god, why do you want to take care of my manor?" Aman smiled and said, "It seems that I was destined to be a blacksmith and a miner since I was born. If it had not been for the changes later, I might have been one for the rest of my life. But later, I became a hunter in the mountains, a guard of the temple, a general commanding the army, and your driver, but I have never been a farmer." Aesop did not say anything more and directly handed over the management of the farm to Aman. He only told Aman how he wanted to run the farm and what crops he wanted to grow. In the eyes of others, Aesop treated his old partner who had returned to his hometown with great generosity and trust. When he did not need a coachman, he handed the farm over to Aman. Aman was still called Aman, and no one would think that he was the god of Igut. They just regarded him as a mortal with the same name as a foreign god. There were many things to worry about in running a farm. Aesop's farm was half flat and half sloping, and most of the crops originally planted were olives. Olive oil was the most important product and export of the city-states of the Euron League. But Aesop changed the crops and planted grapes on the sloping land to make wine. He even built his own wine cellar on the farm and planted wheat on the flat land. The fertile plains near the city-state of Mytilene were limited, and the yield of wheat on many lands was not high. People would rather import wheat than grow their own, but Aesop did the opposite. It would take at least a year or two to see a good harvest if he changed the crops. Medanzo also asked Aman in private, "My god, you escorted Aesop back to his homeland and now fulfill his wish. Do you want to accompany Aesop to the end of his life by staying here?" Aman shook his head and said, "This is not for Aesop. He has the company of his family in his hometown and is living a good life. This is what he wants, not what the gods have given him. Without me, he could have hired better farmers to take care of the grange. As the god he believes in, there is no need for me to stay here. Even if I am far away in heaven, I can still hear his prayers and calls. I came to the human world to seek my own confirmation. I am here to deal with people and observe what they think. Everything is done by me and happens naturally. This is not the same as looking at the human world from heaven. The experience along the way, including the drama we saw in Yaluan City and what Aesop did, are all inspiring me." Since Aman said so, Medanzo naturally stayed in Aesop's house. Gods and level 9 oracles would not care about a year or two. In the eyes of others, Medanzo and Aman were both followers that Aesop brought back to his hometown. Medanzo was a handsome and majestic warrior. To be able to escort Aesop all the way back to Medulla, He was obviously not weak. He might even be a supreme warrior. With him around, naturally, no one dared to cause trouble for Aesop. After Aesop handed the grange to Ammon, he no longer asked about it. Every day, other than going to the city square to find Thales or to chat with the others, he would talk to Whale in the shops about everything under the sun. Whale did not quite understand one thing and deliberately asked, "My dear uncle, running a farm is naturally not as profitable as doing business, but it does not matter if you like it. After all, it is preserving the ancestral land. You grow grapes to make wine. If the wine is good, it is also a good business, but growing wheat is obviously not as good as growing olives." Aesop smiled and said, "Wait and see, it will not take long for you to understand." Now the conflict between the Yaluan alliance and the Gabados alliance on the Hetan Peninsula is getting more and more intense. The Kingdom of Macedonia in the north is rising, and the Potsdam Empire is still unwilling to accept defeat. In this situation, can the Yaluan alliance maintain its position as the hegemon of trade for a long time? Once the sea lines of communication are cut off, or the focus of trade shifts, what will happen to the medulla city, which lacks products? When your second brother does business, whose money can he make? Everyone is growing olives. If the olive oil cannot be shipped out because of the war, what will the result be? I have talked to your brother about the recent strategic situation, mainly military, but I am still the owner of the grange, and naturally have my own considerations. While Aesop was talking to his nephew, a young man walked into the shop. He was wearing a short-sleeved tunic and holding a willow branch. He looked very delicate. Aesop stood up and greeted him, "Sir, may I ask what you want to buy?" The young man smiled and shook his head. "I am just looking for a grocery store in the city, and I came in to see if there is anything I need." Aesop waved his hand, "Then you can look around." The young man looked at the goods on the shelves, and suddenly pointed to the most exquisite statue on the back of the shop, and asked, "How much is Zeus selling here?" Aesop replied politely, "Not Zeus, but the statue of Zeus. The one you pointed to is selling for 2 silver coins." The young man asked with a smile, "The great Zeus is the father of the Olympian gods. Can this solemn statue be put on the shelves like ordinary goods? Can the faith in the gods be traded with money? Shopkeeper, please answer this question, otherwise, how can you sell the statue and earn your profit in the name of the gods?" The young man's question was very interesting, and it sounded like he was looking for trouble. But this was the territory of the Euron League, and there were often all kinds of sages or wise men having similar debates in the city's temple square, so Aesop was not surprised. It seemed that the young man was a wandering sage who was passing by, and he was asking the shopkeeper who sold the statue. Aesop replied unhurriedly, "I have been to many countries in the continent, such as Igut, where statues cannot be sold openly, or it will be regarded as a blasphemy against the gods. But the statue did not fall from the sky, and if the government or the people wanted to build a statue, they had to hire craftsmen to carve and paint it, and this would be paid. The faith here is more tolerant, and people have closer feelings for the gods. If you are willing to pay for this statue instead of using the money to go to the tavern for a drink, this proves that you are willing to pay for your faith. The money is not earned by the gods, but paid to the craftsman who carved the statue, the coachman who transported the statue, and the shop that sold the statue. If you think that you are buying a god, then 2 silver coins is indeed blasphemy. You can give Zeus a price yourself, but in fact, no one can afford it. All we have is the starry sky above our heads and the faith in our hearts. Worldly possessions are a way of expression, so I would like to ask you, how much are you willing to pay for such a statue?" The young man was slightly stunned, as if he did not expect such an answer from Aesop. He changed the topic and pointed to the statue of Hera next to Zeus. "So how much is this statue for?" Hera was the legendary wife of Zeus. Her statue was a painted work of stone carving. She wore a crown decorated with peacock feathers and a bright long dress. Her figure was plump, and her face was dignified. She looked radiant. Aesop replied, "It costs 4 silver coins." The young man was surprised. These 2 statues are made of the same material and are of the same size. Why is Hera's statue twice as expensive as the statue of the father of the gods? Aesop explained calmly, "This is a statue of a goddess. The crown and clothes are much more complicated, and the craftsmen have to spend twice as much time to carve it carefully. If they are not careful, they can easily damage it, so the whole stone will be useless. That's why it is more expensive." The young man nodded, then pointed to the bottom of the wooden shelf and asked, "Then the statue of Hermes, the patron of the city of Medusa and also the patron of merchants, is about the same size as the previous two statues. The carving is also very beautiful. I like it very much. How much are you going to sell it for?" At this moment, Amon's voice suddenly sounded in Aesop's soul. "The young man in front of you is the god Hermes himself. He came from Olympus, and he came directly from the altar of the city's temple." Amon was far away in the vineyard, but he noticed the situation and secretly reminded Aesop. Aesop did not show any strange expression when he heard Amon's voice. He said calmly to Hermes, "Are you talking about this statue? If you pay 6 silver coins for the 2 statues just now, this will be a bonus, and the shop will give you a discount." Hermes's smile froze for a moment, and then he asked, "I think this statue is not bad. Aren't you going to sell it for more?" Aesop was still smiling. "This is just a statue, and it's worth so much. It's the real deal. I don't want to cheat you." Hermes frowned slightly. "Old man, do you know who I am?" Aesop replied, "You are a customer who came to ask about the price. I am the owner of the shop." The young man turned around and walked out of the shop without saying a word. Wilke, who had been standing at the side, felt a little strange. Then Amon's voice rang in Aesop's soul again. "Aesop, I want to say thank you. You have given me the best inspiration for the problem I have been thinking about." Why did Amon thank Aesop? Perhaps only the god himself knew. And what was Hermes's purpose in coming here? Perhaps only that deity could understand this in his heart. In the meeting of the citizens of the city, Hermes had once given an oracle at the request of the people. "People of Meduria, the old man in front of you has returned from a foreign land. He has not received the light of the gods there, so the gods will not prove his identity. He needs to prove it himself." And the way Aesop proved his identity was to lift the hidden mark of Hermes's scepter in the old house, and when the house was rebuilt, he put the stone slab back untouched. Hermes was clear about Aesop's faith, and Aesop also expressed his own faith. This silent dialogue between gods and mortals was equal. When Hermes came to the human world and appeared in front of Aesop, whether he said his name and identity or not, Aesop would treat him as a customer who came to ask about the price. The goods in the shop were sold as they were, and Aesop did not disrespect this customer. And Amon watched this scene, understood the cause and effect, and also had his own understanding. Chapter 310. After the end of the Hyban War, the city of Euron was established, and the Euron alliance dominated the sea. There were constant conflicts with the Kabata alliance established by the city of Kabbalah, and the frictions and battles increased in scale. In the eyes of Amon, who was once a general of the empire of Igut and the commander-in-chief of the battlefield, the war on the Hetan Peninsula was somewhat comical. Sometimes it was like a competitive game. Although war was always accompanied by casualties, the casualty rate of the city-state conflicts was much lower than that of the battlefields of other countries in the continent, and surrender was a common occurrence. The Hetan Peninsula lacked large open plains, and the scale of each city-state was relatively small. Therefore, the popular chariot formations in the continent were very rare, and the city-state armies were mainly infantry. There were also heavy cavalry, but the cavalry equipment was more expensive. Basically, it was composed of noble warriors, and they were also the main force of the charge in battle, followed by a swarm of infantry. In small-scale battles between city-states, the charging and killing of noble warriors and individual combat often became the main factors that determined the outcome, and the momentum of both sides also determined the morale. Once the battle line collapsed, in most cases, they would not pledge to fight to the death, but would choose to surrender when the opportunity arose. The winning side usually would not be ruthless. This kind of battle was very much like the wrestling in the legend of the Age of Heroes, where the losing side surrendered to the winning side. After a period of time, there would be changes in the alliance or the balance of power between the city-states, and new conflicts would occur. Therefore, the situation between the city-states on the Khitan Peninsula was very chaotic, and the sphere of influence controlled by the Kabata alliance and the Euron alliance was constantly changing. How could such a military organization defeat the invasion of the Pot's army? In fact, when Pots invaded, many states surrendered at the sight of the wind. It was Euron and Gabados who united the city-states and used logistics and terrain advantages to fight a protracted war of attrition with the Pot's army that attacked from afar. The key to deciding the outcome was the powerful navy of the city of Euron and the well-trained Kabata warriors. The Euron people were proficient in naval warfare, and the Kabata warriors had a heavy battle formation. After the retreat of the Pot's army, the Khitan Peninsula fell into a period of low-intensity but frequent civil war, which was also the period of the most intense social class division. The composition of the residents of the Khitan Peninsula was complex, including nobles and citizens. Of course, the nobles also enjoyed citizenship. Citizens and commoners weren't the same concept. Instead, they were adult men who enjoyed the political power of a city. During the period of the city-state alliance's struggle for hegemony, more and more free citizens lost their land and citizenship due to various reasons. In order to make a living, these free people didn't have many choices. During the chaos of war, they would become mercenaries, helping whoever paid them to fight, regardless of who the opponent was. Under such circumstances, the wars between many city-states were resolved by conquest or surrender, rather than life-and-death battles. When there was no war, those who had lost their land would have nothing to do, and would often go to various merchants or farms to find temporary work. There were many such people outside Amon's manor. Early in the morning, Amon came to the road outside the vineyard. He shouted, "People who have nothing to do, who can help me with the work in the vineyard?" Soon, people gathered around and asked, "Do you need temporary workers? How much do you pay?" Amon stretched out a finger and gave a surprisingly generous reward. Work until sunset, and each person will be paid a silver coin. Many people happily entered the vineyard and began to work. When the sun was high up in the sky, Amon was still standing at the vineyard's entrance hiring people. Someone came to ask for their wages, and he once again gave a silver coin. Even more people entered the vineyard and began to get busy. At noon, Amon was still standing in front of the vineyard hiring people, and workers continuously entered the vineyard. Until the afternoon, Amon was still standing in front of the vineyard, and he still gave a silver coin. The vineyard was bustling with activity, and when the sun set, the workers came out one after another. Amon was still standing in front of the vineyard, and his feet hadn't moved since sunrise. Every worker who walked out of the vineyard was paid a silver coin. The workers who entered the vineyard early in the morning shouted unhappily, "This isn't fair. We worked under the hot sun all day, and the workers who came in the afternoon only worked for a short while. Why do we get the same pay?" Amon replied, "Because I promised them that their wages would be 1 silver coin. I have to keep my promise." The workers who entered the vineyard in the morning shouted again, "But we did more work than them, and we should be paid more." Amon said again, "But you also promised me that the wages would be 1 silver coin, and you have to keep your promise." Some people still wanted to argue, but at this time, the majestic Medanzo rode over on a tall horse, and it seemed that he didn't come with good intentions. Everyone received their wages and quickly dispersed. Medanzo dismounted and saluted Amon. Amon smiled and said, "Medanzo, you came at the right time. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have been beaten. Why don't you evaluate this matter and see if I did the right thing?" Medanzo blinked his eyes and said, "My God, what you just said is completely correct, but no farm owner would do something like this. What is your motive?" Amon fell into deep thought. After a while, he replied, "I was just creating some trouble to see how people would react." "You have done nothing wrong," said Metatro. "You have given these idlers a chance to work, to be paid far more handsomely than the work itself, and at the same time you have shown your commitment and generosity to the laborers." Amon smiled and said, "But I didn't do anything right either. The world has its own logic, and human nature has its own characteristics. If I come back tomorrow morning, I'm afraid I won't be able to hire anyone. Amon's prediction was right. When he arrived at the vineyard early the next morning, there were many people loitering around, but no one was willing to enter the vineyard to work. Amon called out, "People who have nothing to do under the sun, why don't you work? Is there no one to hire you? Then come and work for me. If you work until sunset, I will pay you a silver coin." However, no one came over. Everyone was waiting. A few newcomers who didn't know what was going on wanted to accept the offer when they heard that the pay was so generous. However, they were whispered into the ears of the people next to them, so they stopped in their tracks. Even if someone wanted to enter the vineyard, it wouldn't be good for them to do so under such circumstances. Otherwise, they would be laughed at for being stupid. The people kept waiting, and waiting. They wanted to wait until sunset in the afternoon. But after noon, Amon turned around and walked into the vineyard. He didn't come out until sunset. In the afternoon, there was already a group of people surrounding the entrance of the vineyard, shouting, "We want to work in the vineyard. Where's that Amon guy? Why didn't he keep his promise?" Medanzo walked out of the vineyard and said with a straight face, "When did Amon say that he would hire anyone in the afternoon? When he couldn't hire any workers, he would naturally leave." The crowd dispersed again. Medanzo walked into the vineyard and saw Amon. He smiled and said, "My God, you are really bad. You are playing with people." Amon smiled and asked, "What did they lose? I never lied to them, but they thought they were smart, but they thought they were cheated." Medanzo didn't say much. He just smiled and said, "Tomorrow, you can hire enough workers." Medanzo's prediction was right. Early the next morning, when Amon appeared at the entrance of the vineyard, there were already many people waiting. Amon still said that he was willing to hire them until sunset, and the pay was a silver coin. On this day, all the work in the vineyard was done. When the workers left, Medanzo asked Amon, "My God, I want to know what you think about these 3 days." Amon said in a low voice, "People can't blame me, but in the past 3 days, what I've done doesn't conform to common sense. It only shows my free will. People make choices based on their reactions and feelings. When people are used to the so-called human nature, they often ignore the simplest thinking. When they make a choice, what is the most fundamental purpose?" This was the story of Amon in the vineyard. People saw him as a stubborn eccentric, but his boss, Aesop, was very lenient towards him. The situation on the Heaton Peninsula was just as Aesop predicted. The Euron League launched a naval expedition, but lost to Gebedos on land. The trade routes between them and many city-states were cut off, and they lost their position as the economic hegemon. The city-state of Meduria was also affected more and more seriously. This winter seemed to be especially cold, and how the merchants got out of their predicament became the hottest topic in the city-state. Aesop became good friends with the sage Thales of Meduria. Thales often preached his views on all things in the city square. He had 2 famous sayings. One was, "Water is the source of all things." He told people that the changes of water, air, and ice also existed in all things in the world, and that the world we see is made of matter. His other famous saying was, "All things have a God. Whether you understand it or not, everything in the world exists for a reason and a way." Thales was very knowledgeable and had traveled to many countries in the continent. He taught people all kinds of knowledge in the square. For example, he once told the craftsmen how to measure a height that a ladder could not reach. They could use a ruler to measure the length of the shadow on the ground and calculate it according to the same ratio. He also explained the astronomical calendar to the people. The content was very complicated and profound, and not many people could understand it. However, he claimed that this knowledge was very useful, and he even predicted the occurrence of solar eclipses. Thus, someone questioned Thales, "Most of the people in Meduria are merchants. Even if they are not merchants, they are still merchants' assistants. Everyone is interested in making money. What's the use of your so-called knowledge if you can't make more money? As for whether the solar eclipses in the sky will happen or not, that's the business of the gods." After hearing this, Thales said to Aesop, "In that case, I have a business to do. Are you willing to cooperate with me?" If you are willing to invest, I will give you half of the profits. Aesop laughed and replied, I am very willing. However much capital you need, you can take it. A kind-hearted person next to him advised, How can you believe in such a scholar who only knows how to talk? He is indeed very knowledgeable, but how can he do business? Aesop smiled and did not say anything. During the winter, Aesop invested in Thales, and Thales used this money to rent many olive oil presses. At that time, no one argued with Thales. They all thought that this matter was inexplicable, and waited to see Thales and Aesop make a fool of themselves. Thales, who was proficient in astronomical phenomena, predicted that the next year, the mountains near the city would have a bumper harvest of olives. Due to the impact of the war, these olives were difficult to transport. Fresh olives could not be stored for a long time, and had to be pressed into oil as soon as possible. Olive oil had always been one of the most important exports of the Eurone alliance. Even if trade was temporarily blocked, the merchants would store it and sell it in the future. Thales thus earned a large sum of money. He did not need to operate the oil presses himself, nor did he need to hire people to do it. He could easily rent out all the oil presses at a higher price. This sage said to the people in the city's plaza, Knowledge is wealth, and the so-called wealth is not only what you see. It is not that my knowledge cannot be used to make money, but that is not what I seek. Aesop also made a fortune in silence, following Thales to earn a large sum of money. Ammon, from beginning to end, also paid attention to these matters. Another autumn arrived. The products of the city could not be shipped out in time, and the import of goods from the outside world was also blocked. The price of wheat and wine produced in Aesop's field soared. Not only did this old man earn a lot of money, but he also used facts to prove his warning to the merchants of the city. Ammon had already stayed in Mytilene for a year, and as a farmer, he welcomed the harvest season. When the grapes ripened, he needed to hire temporary workers to harvest them. One day, he arrived outside the vineyard. Before he could even shout, someone came over and asked, Ammonius, do you want to hire someone to harvest the grapes? How much will you pay me if I help you pick all the grapes in your garden? Ammon was slightly startled. He had seen this person in the theater in Yarn City. It was Zeus who walked the mortal world. The one who was supposed to come was finally here. Ever since Hermes appeared in front of Aesop's shop, he had expected this day to come. Zeus called him Ammonius instead of Ammon, which was equivalent to revealing his identity. When Zeus spoke, Ammon confirmed one thing. The man in front of him was Zeus himself, who had come directly from Olympus to the human world, not an avatar. Ammon replied with a smile, Zeus, if you are willing to accept my employment and complete all the work, I can pay you a parangon. Zeus walked into the vineyard, but Ammon was still standing at the entrance. Zeus turned back and said, Farmer outside Mytilene, are you not coming in to supervise the work? Chapter 3:11. Upon hearing this, Zeus chuckled. All right then, you pay up. In the blink of an eye, all the grapes had been harvested. They were placed neatly in rattan frames. Zeus quietly used the most brilliant spatial magic in the world, which could be considered a miracle. Then he said with a smile, I've picked all the grapes and put them in order. I've done more than what I've asked for. As the employer, will you thank me? Ammon smiled bitterly. What would you like to thank me in return? Zeus, I heard that a god came to Mytilene and planted grapes with his own hands. He even built his own wine cellar to make wine, but the gods of Olympus have never smelled the aroma of wine. I am very curious and would like to taste the wine here. Ammon, how did you notice my wine cellar? Zeus, actually, it's not that I noticed you. Of all the vineyards on the entire Hetan Peninsula, yours is the only one that does not offer sacrifices to the god of wine during harvest season. Dionysus was very surprised and wanted to come and see, but I found you here, so I came in person. Ammon nodded. I see. Medanzo was in the vineyard when he suddenly heard Ammon's words. He was a little puzzled and asked curiously, My god, what song do you want to sing? Ammon, Ode to the god of wine. The people here sing Ode to the god of wine. Medanzo was startled for a moment, then he started singing loudly. Raise your glass high, let us sing to our heart's content. Joy overflowed on the top of the mountain, dancing until the gods were drunk. The fine wine flowed like a red river, sweeping away all his worries. Will the god come? We sang all night to summon him. Wine moistened our throats, hair bathed in the breeze, looking up at the sacred light of the starry sky until the starlight disappeared, running barefoot to the rising sun, moving along the river and the canyon, running to the gods with open arms. It's like I've returned to my hometown, pouring out my troubles to the gods, drinking to my heart's content and forgetting all my sorrows. Medanzo was very handsome and his singing voice was very resonant, but this ode to the wine god sounded like a donkey braying. When the other farmers in the farm heard this, they whispered to each other that the warrior must have been drunk from singing. Who knew how much wine he had taken from the cellar? This ode to the wine god was a song that people sang and danced while drinking to celebrate the harvest of grapes and to thank the wine god. At the same time, they prayed to the wine god to bless them so that they could make even better wine in the coming year. Medanzo didn't drink at all. He just followed Amon's instructions and howled at the top of his lungs. At the end of the song, Amon smiled and asked, "Is it good?" Zeus frowned and said honestly, "It's really bad. Why did you ask him to sing it?" Amon smiled and explained, "Thank you for your reminder today. When in Rome, do as the Romans do." Zeus said, "But the wine god can't hear you. Even if your disciple sang the ode to the wine god, in Mytilai, he wouldn't be singing to Dionysus in his heart." Amon said, "After the harvest of grapes, people drink and sing, hoping to make even better wine in the coming year. What a simple and lovely feeling. If I hire enough Mytilai workers today, I don't mind serving them wine. They will also sing to their god of wine, Dionysus. But you harvested all the grapes by yourself, so you should be the one singing." Zeus changed the topic and asked Amon, "Are you going to buy me a drink or not?" Amon took out a parangan and handed it to him. "Of course I'm going to buy you a drink. This is your reward. Please take it." They arrived at the farmer's hut in the vineyard, where there was a table and 2 stools. Amon took out a barrel of wine, 2 ceramic cups, and a flagon, and poured Zeus a full cup. After sitting down, he said, "Please taste the wine I brewed." Zeus took a sip. Sia smacked his lips and said, "This tastes the same as the wine in Mytilai. Although it's not bad, it's not the best wine in the world. If you hadn't told me yourself, I wouldn't have believed that it was brewed by the gods." Amon explained, "It's not wine brewed by the gods, but wine brewed by the farmers of Mytilai. Have you drunk it in the city? Then it was transported from here to be sold. The grapes were planted last year, and the banquet was built last year as well. It's far from being comparable to the best wine, but this farm has done its best." Zeus raised his cup and said, "Farmer of Mytilai, let me toast to you." He extended his hand. Amon also raised his cup, but he suddenly felt a strong force rushing toward him. Zeus sat opposite him and raised his cup. It was just a cup of wine, but the farm outside the hut, the wilderness outside the farm, and the world that contained the wilderness seemed to have collided with this cup of wine. Ceramic cups were not suitable to be touched with force, and the slightest carelessness would cause it to shatter. This cup of wine from Zeus was even more undrinkable. Amon raised his cup without batting an eyelid. It was dawn outside, and the sun had just risen. Smoke curled up from the farmhouse in the distance, and the wilderness had just woken up from a deep sleep. Under the sunlight, it seemed as if their eyes were still hazy. The wine in Amon's cup rippled gently, reflecting the scenery of the world. Their cups clinked together. With a ding sound, the 2 huge forces collided and disappeared without a trace in an instant. Both of their wine glasses were undamaged. Zeus looked a little surprised. He looked at Amon approvingly and nodded, then drank the cup of wine in one gulp. Both gods were the lords of their respective heavens, and they had realms above the god of creation. It was almost impossible for them to fight directly, and it was even more impossible for them to really fight in the human world. Zeus's sudden attack was a little unexpected to Amon, but this was not a real duel, but a competition of realms. Even if someone was standing by and watching, they would not find anything unusual. What was Zeus's purpose? Was he trying to test Amon's strength? After finishing the first cup, Amon filled the cup again and said, "You are the guest, and I am the host. I should be the one toasting you." However, before he finished speaking, he was stunned. His hands stopped in the air, and his body also froze. Zeus asked meaningfully, "Ammonius, who is the guest and who is the host here? What happened?" Ammon reached for the glass, but his hand passed through it like a shadow. He couldn't hold it. The wine cup was placed on the table, and the table was placed on the ground. Everything around them seemed to be integrated with heaven and earth, and Ammon had become an outsider. He was still sitting in the same place, but he had become an irrelevant bystander. Zeus had silently kicked him out of this world. What a brilliant method! He did not touch anything in the human world, but he sent a god away. Only those who had the achievement of the god of creation could do this. If Ammon did not really want to fight with him, and if he did not have the corresponding realm, he could only stare at him now. Then Ammon smiled, put down his hand, picked up the cup again, and said, "If I were a farmer, I would be treating a hired worker to a drink. But since it is you who came, I am indeed a guest." He picked up the cup again, and his body and soul silently merged into this world again. Ammon was still Ammon, and the wine was still wine. This action was equivalent to proving one thing to Zeus. Their achievements were the same, and in terms of realm, no one was better than the other. Zeus praised, "Thank you for the toast." The two drank the second cup of wine. Zeus raised the wine cup and poured the third cup for Ammon. Then he picked up the cup and handed it over. Ammon reached out to take it, but found that he could not reach it. Zeus quietly changed the time and space between the two, as if they had both left this world. Although they were sitting across the table, they were infinitely far away from each other. Ammon stretched out his hand, but he could not touch the cup no matter how hard he tried. They were sitting in the room, one holding the cup, and the other stretching out his hand. Ammon's fingertips were just about to touch the edge of the cup, but there seemed to be something strange between the two of them. This was a competition of great magic power. Zeus wanted to make Ammon unable to get the cup of wine, but it was much more difficult than Ammon wanting to take the cup of wine. In the blink of an eye, Ammon said, "This wine is just right. If you don't drink it, it will be sour." Both gods moved, and there was a moment of trance in their bodies, as if the scene just now did not happen at all. Ammon took the cup of wine and said again, "Thank you." It was still early in the morning outside the room, but now it was dusk when Zeus poured a cup of wine and handed it over. This competition finally tested out the strength of Zeus, and Zeus's magic power was obviously above Ammon's. Zeus smiled and brought himself another cup of wine, and the two gods raised their cups and drank again. The test and competition stopped here, and Zeus did not fight again. While drinking, Zeus said, "Ammon, I heard that you also hired a temporary worker here last year, and it made the locals talk about it. I want to ask, if someone came to your vineyard without permission and worked for a day, and then asked you for a silver coin, would you give it to him?" He was obviously blaming Ammon for entering the divine realm of Olympus without permission. It would have been fine if Ammon had just passed by, but he had been staying here. "Zeus, I didn't ask you for a reward," Ammon replied with a simple and honest look on his face. Zeus said, "With our identities, there is no need to beat around the bush. What is your purpose of coming here?" Ammon replied, "In order to prove it, when I created the kingdom of heaven and surpassed the realm of the God of creation, I found that my vow was not fully realized. So I knew that the path I was pursuing was still unknown, but I did not know where to find it. This place is different from the countries I have experienced, so I came to witness all kinds of stories." Zeus asked, "Are you borrowing the divine realm of Olympus by doing this?" Ammon did not answer, but he did not deny it either. He entered the Hetan Peninsula as a coachman and stayed here as a farmer. However, he was indeed learning from the different beliefs in another god system's divine realm and seeking enlightenment from them. Since he was a god, Zeus was not wrong. Seeing that Ammon did not answer, Zeus asked again, "Are you planning to join the Olympian divine clan?" Ammon said, "Of course not. Aren't you asking the obvious? In that case, You should make an agreement with me. What agreement do you want to make with me? Asked Ammon. What do you think? Ammon entered the divine realm of Olympus without permission and did not show any miracles as an ordinary person. He did not want to attract the attention of the Olympian gods, lest it lead to unexpected conflicts. But he did not say hello or make any promises. Zeus did not know what he was going to do here. Moreover, gods did not need to show miracles in the human world. They could use other ways to guide the people's faith and let them accept a new kind of guidance. Those who spread faith in the world were not necessarily gods. If someone else happened to pass by, it would not be a big deal. But Ammon, as the lord of another divine realm, did not want to leave. How could it not arouse the suspicion of the Olympian gods? Of course, Zeus had to make things clear. Tong Meng thought for a moment and replied, My vow is not to become a god on the continent, but what you said is also true. This is currently the realm of the Olympian gods, and I am trying to understand and verify the truth. You have found me and you should make a request. What do you want? Zeus said bluntly, You cannot be a god here. What did that mean? Zeus did not want to expel Ammon, but he wanted Ammon to abide by an agreement. He could not promote his identity as a god, nor could he show miracles, guide the people's faith, and he could not interfere in the affairs here as a god. Although Ammon had done this before, he did not promise anything, and Zeus wanted him to make a clear promise at this moment. Otherwise, if Ammon stayed here for decades, with his means, if he deliberately wanted to achieve a certain goal, it was estimated that the nearby cities would have to convert to Ammon. Even if Zeus did not care, Hermes would not agree, and the guardian gods of the nearby cities would not agree either. Marduk had annexed the entire divine realm of the Anunnaki divine clan and expanded with the help of the Pot's empire, and Ammon's means were even simpler. He only needed to come to the divine realm of another divine clan, and he could slowly poach them without them noticing. Ammon said unhurriedly, I understand what you mean. Since you have made a request, as long as this is still the divine realm of the Olympian gods, I will not appear as a god, nor will I interfere in the affairs here with the means of a god. But don't forget, even if I am not a god, I am still a top mage and supreme warrior. Zeus smiled. That doesn't matter. There are plenty of sorcerers and warriors in the human world. There won't be many without you. Ammon said again, Zeus, in fact, I do not think the same as you. I can allow the gods of the Olympian divine clan to enter my divine realm, as long as they act in a reasonable way, or they can spread another faith and let people choose for themselves. Zeus replied, That is your business, your thoughts, and your promise, but you cannot ask the gods of Olympus to do so. Ammon shook his head. I do not want to ask you in the same way, but to make another promise to the gods of Olympus. You came here to drink with me, not just to make such an agreement, right? Zeus smiled again. This agreement is what Hermes wants you to make. I am afraid that he will anger you, and he is no match for you, so I came in person. Between you and me, we should actually talk about other things. Ammon said, Was this your purpose when you tried to test me just now? You wanted to know if I was qualified to talk to you? Zeus held his cup awkwardly and said, You are the only one here who has the right to talk to me about certain things. Ammon asked in return, Have you forgotten Marduk? Zeus sneered. There is no place for him in this room. Ammon smiled. But you are still thinking about him in your heart. Zeus said with a faint smile, Aren't you also spying on my divine realm by coming to the realm of Olympus? I don't believe you haven't thought about Marduk. You are looking for a way to prove yourself, so you will naturally think about everything you can witness. And in my opinion, you are still far from that. I am afraid it is too early to talk about your so-called oath. Ammon smiled bitterly. Long before I became a god, I made a vow. As for the world of Marduk, to be honest, I have already been there. He introduced a message into Zeus' soul, introducing what he saw and heard in the world of Mahesvara. Zeus was slightly startled. You have run far enough, like a lost child. Ammon, people who know the direction in their heart will not get lost. The only difference is whether there is a way or not. Zeus, To tell you the truth, I came here to discuss with you how to deal with Marduk. Ammon, why would I want to deal with him? Zeus narrowed his eyes. Your believers worship you as the only god, and Selenger is still under the rule of the Potsdam Empire. You can stay in heaven and enjoy the glory, but why did you come to the human world? Anyway, you don't know where the road is, so try it the way the human world does. This may not be a way to deal with him, but it is my wish and your attempt. Ammon thought for a moment and replied, that can be considered, but you also said that I can't be a god here. Zeus smiled. Darius is just an emperor on earth, and what he can do, others can also do. Ammon thought again and said, well, we can cooperate. I should also verify what Marduk has done, otherwise how can I talk about surpassing him? But I also want to remind you that based on my experience in the Hetan Peninsula, the divine realm of Olympus is chaotic enough. You should take care of your own affairs first before we talk about anything else. The Olympian divine clan was different from the previous divine clans on the continent. It was surprising that it had 12 main gods at the same time, and Zeus was only one of them. Each city had its own guardian god, forming different divine realms. Although they all nominally belonged to the Olympian divine clan, the gods on earth were independent. The era of the city-states on the Hetan Peninsula was not only an era of constant disputes and conflicts, but also an era of conflict and explosion of ideas. That was why Ammon had met so many sages, who had so many strange and even bizarre ideas in the eyes of ordinary people. He had also seen so many wonderful human dramas in the city of Yaren. For Zeus to resolve this situation without violating his promise to the gods, it was obviously not easy. He needed to foster a powerful city-state, unify the Hetan Peninsula in a real sense, and then cross the strait westward to conquer the entire Persian Empire. From the map of the continent, Zeus's plan was to let an ant swallow an elephant, and only gods like him and Ammon dared to think of it. But the city-state chosen by Zeus would not be Yalon or Gabados. The actual situation was the opposite. Zeus wanted to punish these two city-states and let them suffer the fate of being conquered and declining. In that case, which city-state would be the one to complete this almost unimaginable undertaking? The result of the discussion between the two lords of heaven was for Ammon to choose, as long as the god the city-state believed in was Zeus. They would work together to complete this task as god and man, respectively. Since Ammon couldn't be a god, he naturally had to do things as a mortal. Zeus was still the lord of Olympus, and he would send down an oracle to give all the cooperation. If they faced the gods of the great light pantheon, the Olympian gods and oracles would solve the problem. This was the division of labor between God and man, and it was also in line with the agreement between gods and mortals. But this time the situation was a little special. The mortal, who made a pact with the god, became Ammon. Zeus's plan was quite cunning. Zeus was very cunning. Where could he find such an outstanding mortal like Ammon? And Ammon, for some reason, agreed to cooperate with Zeus. Zeus wanted to prove his achievements, and Ammon was trying to find a way to prove it. After the two gods reached an agreement, Zeus said, in the future, the entire Hetan Peninsula will be truly unified. When we leave the Hetan Peninsula and enter the new divine realm, you and I can spread the guidance of the divine clan by our own means. But you promise to let the Olympian gods enter your divine realm only because your vow is different, not because you are particularly generous. I will not thank you when the time comes. Ammon smiled bitterly. This is after the Hetan Peninsula is unified, and then we will annex the Potsdam Empire. When the time comes, we will rely on our own means. It is like doing business. It is too early to think about how to divide the property before the business starts. Zeus raised his glass and laughed. Then I wish that we both get what we want. Ammon also raised his glass. The two looked at each other and smiled. Zeus's expression suddenly froze for a moment. The wine glasses moved forward in the air, but it seemed that they would never touch each other. Zeus looked into Ammon's eyes. The cottage, the grange, and the world in the suburbs of Maduri disappeared from his side. Another world appeared in Amon's eyes, and Zeus completely included Zeus. When they drank the first glass of wine, Zeus suddenly sneak attacked Amon. When the two finished discussing, they raised their cups again, and Amon suddenly raised his cup in return. The cottage was gone, and they sat in another world drinking wine. There was a strange dividing line between the two. Amon sat in a desert, facing the picturesque wilderness and mountains, while Zeus sat on a grassland, facing the burning flames and thick smoke of the desert. This was the divine realm created by Amon. Zeus's glass of wine could not cross the boundary. When it touched Amon's glass, it was equivalent to being trapped in the world shown in Amon's eyes. At this time, Amon saw Zeus smiling. His eyes also reflected a world, a towering mountain range, clouds floating between the peaks, and many exquisite palaces floating in the air, like embellishments between the mountains. It was the Olympian heaven. Zeus broke free from Amon's great magical power, as if returning to his own divine realm, or as if using the divine realm created by his soul to invade Amon's divine realm. With a ding sound, the wine glasses gently touched each other, and everything returned to normal. This confrontation ended in a draw. It was late at night outside the cottage, and the sky above the grange was full of stars. The battle between the two gods was silent on earth, but it alarmed the divine realm created by each of them. Medanzo noticed someone walking into the vineyard, and immediately pulled out the key of fate and came outside the cottage, only to see two gods standing opposite each other. One was Artemis, whom he had known for a long time, and the other was Apollo, whom he had seen on the stage. Apollo was holding a golden bow, and Artemis was holding a silver bow. Neither of them drew their bows and arrows, but they were just watching each other. Seeing Medanzo coming over, Artemis nodded at him, but Apollo glared at him. At this time, another god appeared outside the cottage. It was Hermes, the chief god of Mytilai, who held a staff in his hand. Hermes said to the two gods, "Please don't fight here." Artemis replied expressionlessly, "I didn't violate the agreement. I'm just watching here to see if anyone else wants to violate the agreement." Apollo also replied coldly, "If Amon and Zeus fight, it will be the invasion of another divine clan, and it has nothing to do with the agreement between us." Metatro didn't know what to do either, but he stood beside Artemis after a thought. At this time, he heard the loud voice of the Scorpion King in his soul again. "What's going on? Did Ammonius run so far away to fight? Do you want us to go over and help?" Medanzo replied secretly, "Don't worry, I don't know the situation between Ammonius and Zeus. They probably won't fight. The Olympian gods are just making a fuss. If they really fight, can't Ammonius run away even if he can't beat them?" Girth's voice shouted again, "Ammonius can naturally escape, but Medanzo, you may not be able to escape. But don't worry, I and the angels in heaven will avenge you." Not to mention how Medanzo cursed in his heart, the atmosphere outside Girth's cottage was a little tense. Zeus and Ammon in the house were naturally aware of the situation outside, but they were still talking unhurriedly. The two drank the last glass of wine, and Ammon smiled and said, "It's messy enough outside. I guess it's a headache for you too. No wonder you have that idea. If it weren't for Marduk, you really wouldn't have the right opportunity to clean up the entire divine realm." Zeus sighed. "I incarnated as King Leone of Kabata, and my original intention was to truly unite the kingdom of Hilton, but unexpectedly it became the situation it is now, and I have to start anew. Ammon, I also want to remind you that keeping a certain promise requires paying a certain price, and the price is not as simple as a silver coin. There are always things in the world that you don't want to see." Ammon nodded slightly and said, "I know very well, but this is exactly what I have to experience." The door of the cottage opened, and Zeus walked out and closed the door behind him, frowning and asking, "What are you all doing here?" "I just harvested the grapes and earned a parangan." "You also want to work to make money and help Ammon make wine?" Apollo put away his golden longbow and said, "Father of the gods, I am just guarding against the invasion of another divine clan." Zeus waved his hand. "It's okay, Ammon and I are just drinking and chatting." Hermes said, "Father of the gods, I am the king of Mytilai. Zeus replied expressionlessly, I know very well, and so does Ammon. What you are worried about has not happened. When the grapes are made into wine, Ammon will leave the city of Migilai. Put away your staff, it is just a toy in my eyes. As soon as Zeus finished speaking, he stepped into the void. Apollo turned around and left as well, but Hermes remained where he was. Artemis put away her silver bow and stared at Hermes. Why are you still here? Hermes was stunned. This is my divine realm, I should be asking you this question. Medanzo also put away the key of destiny and smiled at Hermes. You are so insensible. The whole city is your divine realm, why don't you stay somewhere else? Do you have to block the door and disturb the meeting? Only then did Hermes react, and with a cold snort, he stomped his feet and disappeared. At this time, Ammon pushed the door open and came out. He smiled at Artemis and said, Nothing happened to worry you, but thank you for coming. Artemis pouted slightly, and her tone was resentful. You sneaked in here without even saying a word, and even let Zeus find the door. Fortunately, nothing happened, otherwise I wouldn't know who to help. Can you tell me what you talked about with Zeus? Ammon nodded. I have nothing to hide from you. If you want to know, I will tell you the truth. It is late at night, let's talk inside the house. Ammon opened the door and invited Artemis in. The moment the door opened, Medanzo was surprised to find that the scene in the house had changed. Behind the door was a manor, very similar to Ammon's territory in Igut. Medanzo happened to see the temple of Batet in the backyard of the manor, Schrodinger's favorite place. The door closed, and Medanzo left tactfully. As he walked, he muttered in his heart, The means of the gods are really amazing, and the small Hetan Peninsula is also full of masters. It seems that I am still far from it. I have followed Ammonius the longest and experienced the most, but when will I be able to transcend eternal life? Why did Zeus punish the two city-states of Euron and Gabados? It was not because their main god was not Zeus. This was the agreement between the Olympian gods, and Zeus had no reason to interfere. It was also not because they started the civil war on the Hetan Peninsula. This was a dispute between the city-states on Earth, and Zeus would not directly intervene. The most important reason was that these two city-states had colluded with the Potsdam Empire in the Civil War, and in order to defeat the other side, they did not hesitate to invite back the enemy they had once expelled together. This was intolerable to Zeus, and people had angered the father of the gods. How did this happen? Why did both Euron and Gabados collude with the Potsdam Empire? The story had to start with a despicable and unscrupulous ambitious man named Fawkes. There was a kind of people in the world who were only full of utilitarian ambitions and had no true beliefs and beliefs. This kind of people did not care who they were enemies with, and they did not care who they submitted to. They had no sense of righteousness, honor, or shame in their hearts, and would use any means to achieve their ambitions. They were different from idealists who worked hard with faith, and their so-called ambitions were only to prove their own personal success. This kind of people often disguised themselves as believers or even saints, saying all kinds of touching words, expressing their reverence for the gods, and describing lofty ideals. But they did not have true beliefs in their hearts, and all the glory they preached was just a stepping stone for them to climb up. True atheists, although not glorious in the eyes of the gods, were not wrong either, because even people who believed in the gods did not believe in the same gods. Atheism was also a kind of belief and belief. This kind of blasphemer, who brought disaster to the world and was also the most hated by the gods, was often standing in the temple. It just so happened that Fawkes appeared in the Hetan Peninsula. Fawkes was a governor elected by the citizens of the city of Euron, and the policies he advocated were supported by the majority of the citizens. Fawkes took advantage of the desire of the businessmen in Euron City to expand and plunder more benefits, and strongly called for the organization of an expeditionary force to occupy the surrounding islands, conquer the economically rich but militarily weak states, and plunder a steady stream of wealth. The people of Euron City were encouraged by Fawkes, and decided to build a powerful navy to carry out the expedition, but they were defeated. At this time, it was difficult to get off the tiger, so Euron used the last sum of money to join the alliance to build a new fleet, and finally turned defeat into victory in the expedition. But just before the expedition fleet returned, the army of the Gebetos alliance pressed on the border, cutting off the Euron alliance's trade route with the outside world. The Gebetos' tactics were quite clever, and the information they had was very accurate. They just happened to attack the weak point of the Euron alliance's defense, and obtain the greatest results with the least cost. Why did this happen? Because the military plan of the Gebetos alliance was made by Fox, and Fox betrayed the Euron alliance. Fox did not want to betray Euron from the beginning, but changed his strategy according to the changes of the situation. At first, he wanted to use the hegemony of the Euron alliance to achieve his personal ambition, but after the failure of the first naval expedition, he saw that the balance of power on the peninsula had been reversed, so he colluded with the Gebetos. Gebetos defeated Euron, and Fox was a great success. He created the hegemony of the Heaton Peninsula by means of overturning the clouds and rain, and he himself also obtained the greatest power, enjoying the satisfaction of success. He often said to himself, "A man should be like this." No one knew which sage he was quoting. But the situation soon changed again. After Gebetos dominated the Heaton Peninsula, seeing that Euron had surrendered, he did not want a politician like Fox to interfere, so he kicked Fox aside and established the oligarchic rule of Gebetos. Fox, who had lost his power, returned to Euron, and made a new promise to the people, saying that he had a way to defeat the powerful Sparta. People believed that he was indeed very talented, and out of the desire to make a comeback, the Euron people elected Fox again. Fox united the city-states that had been plundered by the Gebetos to organize a navy. In order to completely dominate, he used his former influence to negotiate peace with the Gebetos nobles, and at the same time, he colluded with the Potsdam Empire to form an alliance. Chapter 313. 294. Inexorable storm. With the help of the Pot's navy, Fox tore up the contract and counterattacked the Gebetos alliance, achieving a series of victories. He achieved an unparalleled and brilliant achievement. He was the symbol of victory and success. No matter how many battles there were in this world, it was all a Vanity Fair for him to build his achievements. The Gebetos alliance retreated under Fox's counterattack. The nobles did not want to lose the hegemony that they had gained. They were also inspired by Fox's various means, so they sent people to negotiate with the Pot's Empire. As long as the Pot's Empire gave up supporting the Euron alliance and supported the Gebetos alliance, they promised to give the Pot's Empire more benefits. At this point, the two hostile groups were simply competing to see who was stronger. The Pot's forces, who had been expelled from the Heaton Peninsula by the Heaton people, were now invited back by the Heaton people themselves. Moreover, the Pot's Empire also had good cards to play. Therefore, the Pot's Empire made more requests to the Euron alliance. They even wanted them to admit that they had ceded many city-states on the Heaton Peninsula to the Pot's Empire. Otherwise, they would support the Gebetos alliance. At this time, the Euron people were finally angry and were ready to use the citizens' assembly to exile Fox. Fox fled when he heard the news, but this politician had no ambition and did not stop there. He went directly to the Pot's Empire to discuss the conditions. Fox told the Pot's people that he had a way to lead the Pot's army back to the Heaton Peninsula. As long as he was appointed as the king of all Heaton, he could achieve the wish that Darius had failed to achieve. If the Pot's people really listened to his bewitchment, the situation might have been different. However, the Pot's people killed Fox, and the life of this ambitious person ended there. The development of the situation had made the Pot's people no longer need a king of Heaton. The Euron alliance and the Gebetos alliance had been greatly weakened and were asking for help from the Pot's. The Pot's could control all of Heaton. It was under this background that Zeus came to the vineyard to find Ammon. The father of the gods of Olympus was angry. He wanted to punish Ammon and truly unify Heaton before completely defeating the Pot's. But what would Ammon do? After Zeus left, Ammon still stayed in Aesop's farm to do the work of a farmer, as if nothing had changed. Hermes was extremely anxious. He stared at the vineyard every day and thought to himself, "When will this god leave?" When the grapes were made into wine and the wine was stored in the cellar, Aman brought Medanzo to bid farewell to Aesop. He said to Aesop, "Old friend, I have to go. You have returned to your homeland and are very happy here. Call to me and I will hear your voice. Your God is still with you and waiting for you in heaven." Aesop enjoyed his remaining years in the city of Mygdalai with his cousin and 3 nephews. He even made some wise friends. It was the life in his homeland that this old man was looking for, and his days were very comfortable. Aman also knew that Aesop's life was coming to an end. The next time they met, it would be in heaven. Medanzo left with Aman and headed north out of the city of Mygdalai. On the way, he asked curiously, "Aren't we going to the Garden of Eden or the Kingdom of Heaven? I heard that Link has just passed the test and has become an angel in the Kingdom of Heaven. He even talked to me in the Kingdom of Heaven 2 days ago, showing off that he is ahead of me." Aman replied, "Medanzo, you are on the road. Achievements are not for show, but for your own verification. You are still the leader of my disciples and the leader of the angels in the future. The reason why I brought you with me is that you need experience. Do you still remember the story of the vineyard? I pay the workers who enter the vineyard in the morning the same wages as those who enter the vineyard in the afternoon. For the Kingdom of Heaven, those who come later and those who arrive first get the same amount." Medanzo suddenly realized and said, "Oh, so you did that for me to see." Aman smiled and said, "I did it for everyone to see, of course, including you. People can get the inspiration they need from it." Medanzo blinked and said, "My God, where are we going now, and what are we going to do?" Aman replied, "From now on until we leave the Hetan Peninsula, you have to call me Aman in any public occasion. We are going to escort someone, an elder I have respected since I was a child, named Aristotle." Why did Aristotle come to Mygdalai? He was just passing by. As the envoy of the Kingdom of Macedonia, Aristotle had just gone to Euron not long ago and represented the Kingdom of Macedonia to conclude an alliance with Euron. On the surface, the content of the alliance seemed to be an alliance between the Kingdom of Macedonia and the city of Euron to jointly resist Pontus. But in fact, this was a covenant in which Euron surrendered to Macedonia. The so-called alliance was dominated by Macedonia, and the Kingdom of Macedonia had the right to issue the oracle. In the past, Euron had signed agreements with other states as the leader of the alliance, but this time, it had become a subservient party. For Macedonia to be able to achieve such diplomatic results, Aristotle, the plenipotentiary envoy sent by King Philip II, could not go unnoticed. Aristotle was originally a nobleman from the city of Euron, and his teacher was the famous sage Plato. Later, he was hired by the King of Macedonia, Philip II, to be a court teacher in the palace. This time, he was sent to the city of Euron to discuss the matters of the alliance. When Aristotle returned to Euron, he not only communicated with the nobles in the city, but also preached to the people in the square and in the shrine. He denounced what Fox had done and told the people that the current Hetan city-states were facing a great crisis. The people of Hetan had once united to repel the army of Pontus, but they did not know how to properly enjoy the fruits of victory. Euron and Gabados fought for hegemony. Under the incitement of the ambitious Fox, both sides had successively colluded with the forces of Pontus in an attempt to strengthen their own power and did not hesitate to betray the interests of the entire Union Kingdom of Hetan. The enemies who had been defeated were invited back by the people of their own accord. The goal that Darius Ironhooves could not achieve was achieved by the people of Hetan themselves. Aristotle summoned all the city-states of Hetan to unite, and not to betray the interests of everyone for the ambition of one city-state. Only in this way could real strength and prosperity be achieved. The unity began with the alliance between Macedonia and Euron. The Kingdom of Macedonia wanted to retaliate against the invasion of the Pontus, and also punish those traitors who colluded with foreign enemies. What Aristotle said was the truth. It was the city of Euron that first colluded with the Pontus, and later, the city of Gabados also colluded with Pontus. The city of Euron was almost unable to breathe under the powerful offensive of Gabados. They also hoped to be able to get help from the increasingly powerful kingdom of Macedonia in the north, expel the forces of the Pots, and defeat Gebetos to restore their former prosperity and power. However, the help did not come without a price. The purpose of Macedonia was to unite the city-states of Heton to end the civil war and expel the forces of Pots, not to support Euron to become the overlord again. The city of Euron was bound to be controlled by Macedonia, so the people of Euron were divided into two groups, respectively belonging to the groups that supported and opposed Macedonia, and they could not agree on the decisions of the city. Aristotle's speech moved many people, and finally, the citizens of the city made a decision and signed the covenant. The people of Euron hoped to temporarily defeat Gebetos with the help of Macedonia, and first get out of the current predicament. They did not intend to abide by this covenant in the future. Although Fox was dead, his toxic stream was still there, and it affected many people in Euron city. Aristotle achieved great diplomatic success. He left Euron with the contract and returned to Macedonia under the escort of the guards. On the way, he had to pass through the northern border of the city of Maduri. Ammon had wanted to visit Aristotle for a long time, and they could meet on the road. Ammon and Medanzo went on the road, but they did not fly directly to find Aristotle's convoy. Instead, they waited on the road that they had to pass through in the northern border of Maduri. It was a mountainous terrain, and the winding road crossed a continuous mountain range, appearing and disappearing in the dense forest. They had to pass through several passes in the mountains. Medanzo said, "The terrain here is very dangerous. It is not suitable for a large army to pass through, but it is most suitable for ambushes and assassinations." Ammon nodded and said, "That's the terrain. Let's sneak through the dense forest and take a look." Medanzo asked, "Do you want to check the situation around the road? Would someone assassinate the special envoy of the Kingdom of Macedonia here? Isn't he a little too daring?" Ammon replied, "There are many people in the world who are audacious to the extreme. Not to mention the special envoy of the small Kingdom of Macedonia, even great emperors like Cyrus or Synac would be assassinated, wouldn't they? I still remember the scene of you charging at Synaca's guards alone. It was very impressive." Medanzo smiled a little embarrassedly. "I was just attracting attention, not the main force to assassinate Synac." Then he sighed and said, "The assassination of Synac was a success, and Princess Sicila has also left with Gilgamesh." Ammon glanced at him and said, "Is there a need for you to sigh?" Medanzo changed the topic. "Aristotle is not a tyrant like Synac, but a respected sage. Who would assassinate him for no reason?" This time it was Ammon who sighed. "It would be best if there is no ambush. I just want you to see if this road is safe. If there is really an assassination, it will be for nothing else but the contract that Aristotle is carrying." Medanzo asked in confusion, "But who would do that? The Boz or the Combatants? It's meaningless." The alliance was decided by the city of Yaluan and the Kingdom of Macedonia. Killing the envoy won't change the fact. Even if they wanted to use this method to stop the alliance, they should have done it before Aristotle arrived at Yaluan city, not now. If they really did that, it would lead to the joint revenge of Yaluan and Macedonia. They couldn't be any more foolish. Ammon sighed again. "You're right. It's exactly because of this that it's unexpected." At this moment, Medanzo exclaimed in his soul, "My God, there is an ambush in front of us, and there are a lot of assassins. So you have already discovered it. A friend from afar, why not drink?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.